Hey everybody, welcome to the stream. How you doing? I hope your Sunday was nice. So, as I said, I think we're going to take an easy stream today. And we're going to read three of the, I think there's going to be a total of four short stories that lead up to The War Within. It's official. They did let these out, as you can see. So, and they're going to be in a book that's going to be coming out relatively soon. So, for an easy little thing to do, and it didn't change the category, but I think it'll be fine because it's still Warcraft related. We're going to read these three stories because I feel like being lazy and do something easy. And let's see if I can actually just read a story nicely. Okay, so um yeah, we're just going to jump right into it. Okay, the first story we're going to do is The Goblin Way. It says by Andrew Robinson. Is that the same one who played Simple Garrick? Okay, not everybody get excited yet. But, because I was wondering too, but no. Different Andrew Robinson. There can be more than one. Let's see if I can blow that up a bit. Bigger so everybody can read along. Okay. All right, The Goblin Way. Monty Gaslow sighed, looking out over a vast mining operation from his spot on a platform above the mine's District floor. This was his fifth fact-finding tour of the week, and it seemed like he'd been going nonstop for months, taking stock of less than desirable working conditions amongst the goblins. This one was easily among the worst, though Marin Nagenfogger, Gaslow's host and guide, acted like everything was above board. If you know about Nagenfogger, that he's a popular gnome. No. Um, I think it was a goblin, yeah. Um, who came up with the Nagenfogger potion, which altered your sizes. This was a quest line way back in the day. All right, we'll go on. Nagenfogger waved for Gaslow's attention, looking out of place in a miraculously unsullied all-white suit that practically gleamed amidst the smoky air and rancid dripping space. It was clear he'd recently taken over this operation. Over here, he called. He turned to one of his bodyguards for help. Is the two-shift work at the, Longwall Shearer? Gaslow offered. Nagenfogger grinned. Yeah, what you said. The Rock Chopper 3000. Beautiful piece of machinery, eh? He beamed more broadly as he gestured down into the enormous mine at a steam-powered behemoth. Its fearsome metal teeth ground relentlessly into the bedrock to get at the vein of iron ore that was the lifeblood of this operation. You gotta lean over the railing a little to really get a good look, unless you want to go down and see it up close, Nagenfogger added, beckoning Gaslow to the platform. Gaslow stepped closer to the railing, waving off his orc bodyguard Vaken. Unlike some goblins, including Nagenfogger, it seems, Gaslow had no fear of heights. As the shearer take two. As the shearer brought ground ore to the surface, Gaslow leaned against the rail to watch workers, mostly goblins and some orcs, operate walking mechs with steam shovels, which loaded ore into mine carts. which would take it to a processing plant. A number of workers had bandages wrapped around their limbs, likely because of the discarded machine parts cluttering the footpaths, and few let outfits of wet, uh, sorry, and a few let out fits of wet, throaty coughs while clamping soiled rags over their mouths. Noggenfogger gave Gazlo a fidgety smiling, nodding as if to say, nice, eh? Gazlo peered back down, and then a section of the railing detached from its mooring with a screech and swung out, leaving nothing but space between Gazlo and a deadly fall. He teetered for a moment before regaining balance, with the help of Vakin, who shot out a beefy hand to grab his collar and haul him swiftly backward. Gazlo whipped a glare at Noggenfogger, whose pointed ears were rigid. Had this been Noggenfogger's aim? To stage some sort of accident? As newly installed head of the Bilgewater cartel and de facto representative of his race to the Horde, Gazlo was aware he had enemies. But he honestly hadn't thought an attempt on his life would come this soon, let alone be this ham-fisted. Of course you gotta do this. Oh, jeez, I didn't know they had this. Okay, download the PDF. Gazlo narrowed his eyes. Look, Noggenfogger, I don't know what you think you know about me, but I don't die that easily. At that, Vaken planted himself between Gazlo and the mine boss, scowling. Whoa, 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 Trade Prince, look at me! Look, it's me, Noggenfogger. I would never do that. In fact, I'm just as shocked as you are. For what it was worth, Noggenfogger had gone a deadly shade of pale green. Though whether this was from the realization his murder schemes had failed, or because he was truly taken by surprise, Gazlo couldn't say. Believe me, he said, surveying the platform. That was an accident. This calamitous breach of construction will not go unpunished, let me assure you. Vaken took a step forward. Vaken took a step toward Noggenfogger, cracking his knuckles with a deep grumble. But Gazlo put out a hand to stay the orc. He had no reason to trust Noggenfogger. In fact, at this point, he knew that he couldn't. But he did see that the head of the Steamweedle cartel was at least as unnerved as he was. Before the tour, Noggenfogger had made it quite clear that he hadn't even wanted Gazlo down there. While flipping through some of the financial statements, he offered Gazlo more than one drink. Knowing Noggenfogger's reputation for poisons and elixirs, Gazlo had repeatedly demurred. He only begrudgingly arranged for a brief overview of the operations at Gazlo's insistence, rambling on about how his time here was limited for the day, what with having a whole other city to run. Ultimately, Gazlo had used the power of the Horde to strong-arm Noggenfogger into agreeing. With a practiced eye, Gazlo ascertained that the platform had been assembled hastily within the last few days. He ground his teeth together. This is the problem I keep encountering, he murmured to Vaken. Our people are smart but erratic. Genius ideas. Inconsistent in execution. We solve difficult logistical problems, but all too often it's the fact that we don't pay attention to the details, to quality control, that undoes our best efforts. The orc crossed his arms and grunted in agreement. In the wake of all that has happened since the disappearance of the former leader of the Bilgewater cartel, Jaster Gallywix, Gazlo has taken pains to inspire the people in this cartel to aim higher and to convince others to do the same. He promoted those who pay attention to detail, who tighten bolts an extra turn and measure twice before they cut. He paid his crew better than anyone else, and the results spoke for themselves. He always been known for getting things done, and he'd never disappoint. He looked over at Noggenfogger. For now, I'm willing to believe you didn't just try to off me. For now. So, lead on. Noggenfogger gave a relieved smile. Smelting and sleecing up ahead next juncture. They walked on towards an opening in the distance, stepping over oily puddles. This kind of thing, Gazlo said, waving his hand to indicate the entirety of the mine. A lot of the horde doesn't respect goblins. Noggenfogger blinked his beady gray eyes. Gazlo ducked under a sagging support beam. Some folks think we're unreliable, he pointed back toward the broken railing. Greedy, he fixed Noggenfogger with a pointed look. Disrespectful. That assessment strike you as accurate? Truth be told, those prejudices deeply bothered Gazlo. But before he could tackle the horde's opinions, he would first have to change how goblins perceive one another. This mine was a microcosm of larger problems. Rushed jobs, shoddy craftsmanship, poor upkeep, overworking people, and management smiling broadly while siphoning off a fat paycheck. Boy, that sounds familiar. Noggenfogger barked a bitter laugh. Like their hands are so clean, he snorted. Anyways, we hold our own just fine. Most goblins aren't even part of the horde, or the alliance for that matter. They value their independence too much. As they approached one end of a vast chamber, Noggenfogger began yammering on about how smoothly things were going, praising his own management. I tell ya, the engineers are always doing engineering stuff. We got explosive guys working explosives. We got drillers, delvers, diggers, and drivers. I saw our shifts gone day and night. Nobody leaves till their quota's being filled, he laughed. Not they want to get paid. Gazlo nodded, scoping out the miners. The overseers worked with enthusiasm, shouting threats into bullhorns, but the pace, Gazlo could see, showed the telltale signs of overwork. Here and there, diggers stopped to lean on their shovels. Gazlo, one of the best engineers of his generation, could see indications that the steam-powered ore-shearing machine wasn't operating properly. He could hear a piston misfiring. He could see and smell the acrid smoke that told him the engine was burning more oil than it should. An audible rattle suggested that the rock chomper would need repairs sooner rather than later. And he could see the same issues throughout the cavern. The place was full of death machines and more death machines. Gazlo picked his way down a slope crumbling with debris and approached a miner transporting ground ore into a cart with a wheelbarrow, not far from a rocket-powered drill sitting idle, dripping some kind of noxious-smelling goop into the dirt. The worker spilled his haul and swore. Hey, pal, over here. How's it going? The miner wiped a blackened hand across his sweaty brow and rested on his shovel. Well, to be honest, he started, but stopped when he saw Noggenfogger peering down at him. Noggenfogger wore a carefully neutral face. Go ahead. Split spark, the miner grimaced. Sir, he added hurriedly. Split spark, that's right. Tell Mr. Gazlo how it's going down here. The worker glanced at his overseer, whose stony face was unmistakably warning. It's aces, as great as Mr. Noggenfogger. Couldn't be happier. We're moving ore like it's nobody's business. So he motioned to his wheelbarrow. I gotta get back to work. Those quotas ain't gonna fill themselves. He busied himself with collecting his spilled hull. Gazlo motioned toward a barrel of water. Sure you don't want to rust? A A drink? Splitsbark wiped his perspiring brow, unwittingly showing angry blisters on his hands. Oh, no. I had some water yesterday, thanks. Nagelfagor smiled and beckoned Gazelle away. You see? Hunky dory. Happy miners, happy engineers, happy drivers, happy drill bits, happy customers. And my operation is clean. Gazelle looked at Vacan, who had just blown a loud snort of offense and disgust. Look, Foggy, noggin fogger. Yeah, whatever. Whatever? Now that's a goblin being disrespectful. You seem to be forgetting I'm leader of the Steam Wheel Cartel, Gazzy. Gazlo cackled. And you seem to be forgetting I'm the trained prince of the Bilgewater Cartel. So, lying to my face, is that really how you want to start this relationship? Nagenfager sputtered, and his bodyguards started to unsheath truncheons, but Nagenfager waved them to a halt. Well, that's about as much time as I've got for today, he said. Gazlo climbed back up the hill of debris to join him. Let's say we keep going. Nagenfager bristled for a moment. With respect, he growled. I didn't think you'd be here for so long. I've got meetings and whatnot to tend to in Gadgetzan, so we're doing this, Gazlo assured him with a smile, gesturing for him to continue leading the way. With respect. I'm sure you wouldn't let Gadgetzan get this bad, would you? Nagenfager mumbled and guided Gazlo farther into the mine, their bodyguards trailing them from a distance. I know what you're trying to sell me here, and I'm not buying it, Gazlo said, climbing over a collapsed pipe. What I'm seeing is your people are overworked and underpaid. Your engineers and tinkers aren't motivated. Your machines ain't getting maintained properly, and that's dangerous. Nagenfager started to object. Gazlo raised a finger, then pointed back to where they left the shearing machine. I can hear bolts rattling on that rock chomper. So, the most generous interpretation here is that this guy's great with elixirs and potions and whatnot, and he's even used to marrying, but maybe he doesn't know anything about mining, and a little bit too much about the bottom line. Nagenfager snorted. The bottom line is king. Nobody cares about maintenance. They care about results. Gazlo grabbed the hand of the nearest worker, revealing the same angry bandaged wounds he's seen on Splitsbark. Skipping maintenance impacts results with your people as much as your machines. How can you expect your engineers to grip a wrench with hands like these? Sure, we get a lot of workers calling out sick, but that's any job, Nagenfager countered. Gazlo sniffed deeply and felt the rank rasp of oily fumes in his nostrils. And the air? You know it ain't good. You're using cheap fuel and rancid oil. You gotta burn cleaner, get the ventilation systems up, and try and pass this off as a clean outfit? Come on, Noggin Niffler. Noggin Fogger. Martin Nagenfager, Nagenfager glared. And it ain't a lie. I'm clean. Most of that stuff doesn't rise to my level of oversight, so I've got plausible deniability of all that mess. Gazlo glared back. That ain't what running a clean operation means. Clean means you're not polluting. Nagenfager's eyes went wild, and he hastened to smooth down his pure white suit, which had become increasingly wrinkled and stained with greasy droplets. Oh. Well, then, no. The work gives off a natural vapor. What am I supposed to do about that? That's what you call a misunderstanding of frankly confusing terminology. Gazlo gestured for Nagenfager to cross a creaky catwalk first. Nagenfager hesitated far too long before obliging. Then Gazlo followed. Look, this ain't just about your bottom line. There's more work we could all have from the Horde. Maybe from folks too, if we can run a tighter outfit together. But how am I supposed to talk to a shaman or a druid when with your mind belching out this smog? How can we convince clients you're reliable when you've got workers out here every day with injuries like that? Look, you come in here. You got no idea what I've had to do to get where I am. You think it's easy scheming your way into a mayorship on the top slot in Steamweedle? The palms I've greased? The elixirs I've concocted? Gazlo laughed. That don't make you special. I rose through the Steamweedle system just like you. Besides, your rivals and enemies seem to mysteriously go toes up in a lot more than the average. Allegedly, Nagafaga corrected. Gazlo cocked an eyebrow. Seriously? Okay, sure, I may be the best alchemist there is, Nagafaga backpedaled. And I got my famous elixir and the occasional other stuff. But it ain't the point. I had to compete with the likes of Gallywix and the Venture Company, and now I'm the boss here. So I should get to call the shots. Me, and a lot of other goblins, believe that if I don't take things this far, I'll be replaced, or worse. Besides, I didn't see anyone making Gallywix clean up his act. No one stops the Venture Company. But I'm the bad guy? Gazlo paused. I know you know what happened to Gallywix. I know he had to split, but he's got nothing to do with Steamwhittle or this mine. You had occasion to deal with him, running Gadget's End. Yeah, he was a bastard. I hated his guts, but I respected how he did business. Did you? Did you respect how he took advantage of his own people and put them to work in those mines, after taking everything they owned in exchange for transport away from Mount Kajaro when it was erupting during the cataclysm? I mean, yeah, harsh, but that's dedication to profit. That's what's going on here. Allow me to explain something. Having injured and sick workers using poorly maintained machinery eats into the bottom line. It's a short-term gain for a long-term loss. Fixing your tools now, having happy, healthy employees now, is an investment. A damn good one. That ain't how we've always done it. Gallywix wasn't a businessman. He was a con man and a criminal. Profit above everything else ain't good business. A lot of people wanted him gone. His own mother tried to assassinate him twice. He solved a lot of problems, but he made worse ones out of them. He got stuff done, but he wrecked more. I asked him once if it bothered him taking advantage of those refugees and working his own people to the bone. You know what he said? It's the Goblin Way. Supply and demand. Deal with it. Noggenfogger shrugged. That is the Goblin Way, right? No, it ain't. That was Gallywix's way. The Goblin Way is invention, innovation, partnership. Those things cost a lot, but they earn a lot for every goblin, not just for a few. Gazlo said, I swear you're missing my point on purpose. Supply and demand is one way to do things. But we can't always be thinking of just ourselves no more. The world is changing. There's nothing wrong with how I run this mine, Noggenfogger protested. Maybe it's no day at the spot, but production is up ever since I took over. Noggenfogger's attitude put Gazlo in mind of another goblin leader he had hoped to forget, because his legacy was as bad in its own way as Gallywix's. Notorious all over Azeroth for their lumber and mining operations, which was to say clear-cutting forests and strip mining areas, leaving barren scars across the land. And the way they operated their oil rigs was reckless at best. Not to mention their arms dealing with groups that neither Horde nor Alliance found palatable. Heard of Mogul Razdunk? Gazlo inquired. Of course, former head of the Venture Company. We modeled this operation on theirs. Of course you did, Gazlo thought. Razdunk was aggressive, he said, but again, he didn't consider the repercussions of his actions, and it caught up with him. He oversaw the Venture Company through expansion in Mulgore, the Stone Talon Mountains, Kultiras, Grizzly Hills, Solashar Basin, and Stranglethorn. But here's the thing. Everywhere they go for a quick buck, it pisses people off. And folks find a way to fight back, to make it harder and harder for them to do business. Pretty soon, everyone there's attacking them. But they just keep doing it. Nagenfager looked less certain. Well, that's the market, though, right? Business is business. Gazlo shook his head. Business is personal. When you wreck someone's home, that's personal, and it's bad for business. They had arrived at a sluice town, a collection of tin shacks that stood hard against the sluices that ran already dirty water over the crushed rock to create a slurry that would separate ore from waste. The ore was run into a massive smelting plant, which melted the rock and purified the ore into metal. This was even worse than Gazlo had expected. The dim lights flickered badly. The air was oily and stale. His eyes burned a little. Gazlo wheezed. You gotta get this place ventilated. The air. You gotta know this ain't sustainable. Sustainable? Nagenfager scoffed. What are you now, a shaman? Gazlo shrugged. I've been called worse by better people. But I'm glad you mentioned it. Part of why I'm here is that the elements themselves have taken offense to stuff like what's happening here and what the venture company does. I'm hearing Azeroth is about out of patience with us and you, Mayor Gadget-san, leader of the Steam Wheel cartel, and yeah, head of this operation. You gotta take your share of responsibility for that. Nagenfager humphed. Gazlo had seen enough. He gestured. Nagenfager led them back into the shearing cavern, where Gazlo called out to a goblin working a machine. Hey, pal, how many times has this machine broke down? This week? 5, he replied plainly. And how much production time has that cost you? The goblin resignedly turned his palms skyward. Gazlo turned his ire back on Nagenfager. And exactly how many sick days have your employees taken because of injury, poor conditions? Nagenfager hesitated. Well, you know about as much about your operation as Razdunk did. He thought he was going to get rich and become a trade prince. What he got was blown up by Gallywix. Don't worship these jokers, Gazlo said. Don't model yourself on them. There are better models. Look at the Horde Council. Nagenfager scowled. How'd you get on the Horde Council anyway, eh? What makes you so special? Nothing. The difference between me and other trade princes is I don't think the world is just here to feed me. I learned a while back. You do better when you don't make it all about you. Nagenfager looked put upon. So what? You arrive, tell me what I'm doing wrong, and then throw me to the wolves to fix it? I get the short end, and you enjoy tea and crumpets? I don't like crumpets. Look, I know we got a steep uphill climb, but if we don't change our business, and I mean for all of us, all the goblins, not the mine, we're going to get left behind. We need to start lifting each other up instead of seeing each other as competition. And I'm hoping that you and I can start together. Nagenfager took a step back. His beady eyes went wide, and then he scowled again, suspicion written all over his sallow face. Now it makes sense. It's not enough you got the Bilgewater under your thumb, and probably some of the Steam Weedle, and your pals in the Horde to back your play. You want my mining operation for yourself. I ask for help. You move in and take over. You're as bad as Gallywix. In fact, you're worse. At least he was honest about how downright foul he was. Gazlo sighed, pinching the bridge of his long nose. I don't want the mine. I didn't want to be head of the Bilgewater cartel. I didn't want to have to represent all goblins to the Horde. I mean, between you and me, that's a lot of pressure. He gazed at the whirring shearer wistfully. I could just be watching speed barge races, he mused. Then why'd you take it? There are plenty of goblins who'd kill your whole family for either of those. I'm probably one of them. Gazlo looked sharply at Nagavagger, but the mind leader didn't care. And you got 'em both, Nagavagger concluded. Some smart guy once said, if someone really wants to be the boss of everything, under no circumstances should they be allowed to have the job. He stared fixedly at Nagenfager. Nagenfager looked abashed. Because they're only in it for themselves. Gazlo smiled. He can be taught. Nagenfager snorted. You can't tell me you don't enjoy all that power. Oh, make no mistake. Being powerful is better than being powerless. If I wanted to be bigger than Gallywix, I could have that. I'm honestly not interested. But like I said, it's more about the responsibility. The other reason is, if you want something done, you ask a busy person. What's that supposed to mean? The council chose me because they knew I could get things done. Plus, Gazlo added, they know I'm a goblin of my word and loyal to the Horde. Big deal. I've got loyal friends in the Horde. We both know that ain't true. Even I was selling to both sides for a while, and there's plenty of goblins who think gold is gold. Nagenfugger smirked. Well, you can't spend honor, can you? Gazlo turned away. Nagenfugger furrowed his brow. Look, what you're saying is great, but how I run things here, it's just how things done. As if on cue, the sound of mechanical grinding filled the air, followed by an explosion and plenty of shouting. The huge shearing machine's engine was venting steam, and workers carried injured operators to safety. Nagenfugger swore, deliberately avoiding Gazlo's gaze. This is going to hold up production. Hey! He screamed at the workers. Back to work! Someone fix that! Tinkers and engineers gathered around the machine, which continued to smoke. Head machinist out injured, one worker shouted. Two other workers lifted blunted and broken tools, exchanging looks of defeat. Nagenfugger looked on helplessly. Whatever else you might be, Nagi, Gazlo urged, you ain't dense. I think you maybe could turn this place around, and I can help you. But you gotta be willing to play nice, and not just with me. Nagenfugger looked unmoored. Our whole system is built on competition, not cooperation. It's how we solve problems. Survival of the fittest, the cleverest, the most ruthless, the best deal makers. It's how we innovate. Why you're trying to fix what ain't broken? Oh, that's broken. And I'm going to show you why. This ain't the Goblin Way. They headed closer to the blast radius. The bodyguards joined them. As they approached the drilling site, the workers saw them coming and gave way to clear a path. Gazlo could hear murmurs and knew the workers were confused he was there. Heck, they were confused that Nagenfugger was in attendance, if not there to threaten them. Gazlo approached several engineers gathered around the open hood of the engine, and Nagenfugger followed. All right, what's going on? An older goblin in grease-stained overalls glared. Don't get your pantaloons in a He stopped when he realized to whom he was talking. Oh, Mr. Nagenfugger, sorry. Look, this beast is long in the tooth. We've been washing out filters instead of replacing them, and it's gunked up. The vibrations take a toll. I mean, we've been tightening bolts left and right, but eventually the threads get stripped, and they just won't hold. The gaskets are kind of shot, and the differential keeps slipping. This machine alone's going to take a fortune to fix. I can't afford to have this offline for long, Nagenfugger told Gazlo. My clients expect shipments on the regular. This'll put me behind. If you let me take some of the heat, will you put the work in here? Gazlo asked. Nagenfugger looked grim, but there were no better options before him. I'll give it a shot. Gazlo took a step toward the machine. Tinker, right? What's your name? Ollie Spracknozzle, you're Mr. Gaslow. Call me Monty. Yeah, Spracknozzle. You know, Skagit used to be head of the Tinkers Union here. One of my crew. Think he's mentioned you more than once in the positive, Ollie. Spracknozzle cracked a grin. He's good people. Then he looked hesitant. Look, excuse my asking, but what are you doing here? We, Gazlo gestured to himself and Nagafugger, are here to help. Ollie screwed up his face. No offense, but this is a mechanics thing, not a. He paused, clearly seeking a word that wouldn't offend. Not a big shot thing. Bosses don't help, they boss. Gazlo grinned. Let's see if we can change that particular perception. Nagavagar was at least savvy enough to grimace noncommittally so as not to actively agonize the crowd. His bodyguards and the miners were both on edge. Still, Gazlo continued. As it turns out, Ollie, I happen to be a fair engineer myself. Mind showing us the problem? The tinker hesitated, clearly not used to deference from bosses, then shrugged, motioning one hand toward the engine. At that, Gazlo removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He gestured to Spracknozzle's tooth belt. I didn't bring my own, Ollie. You mind? What are you doing? Nagafire hissed, pulling Gazlo aside. Gazlo stooped beside the broken machine. What's it look like? Fixing this thing. You're gonna make me look bad. Well, hell, Noggenfogger. You say you're a good leader and hustler, so hustle. Get your people in here to help. Gazlo paused, an idea take a shape. In fact, yeah, one of them elixirs of yours. It literally makes people tiny, among other things. Break out whatever stash you got. Give it to your tinkers and engineers, and actually get them in there to help me fix it. Nagafarger gasped. Sorry, give it to them? For free? He hissed under his breath. The ingredients alone. Big picture. Gazlo glared at the mine leader, who gritted his teeth, wrestling with the idea. Fine. Nagavagar stomped off. In the next half hour, Nagavagar, somewhat reluctantly, returned with a case of his special elixir and gave it to a platoon of somewhat reluctant machinists, engineers, and tinkerers who had volunteered to help Gazlo fix the rock chomper. They got to work. Gazlo was in his element now, under the hood solving a mechanical issue, oblivious to the growing crowd of workers trying to figure out what was going on. Nagavagar looked on, tapping his foot, glancing around. He moved alongside Ollie. Spracknozzle. The workers who got hurt. How many? 4, Mr. Nagavagar. Tell them, Nagavagar winced, that with no admission of culpability, mind you, I'm going to take care of them. Like medically, I mean. I've got something to make 'em right. Ollie looked at Nagavagar as if he spoke gibberish. He opened his mouth to respond but had trouble finding words. That'll be a load off their minds. Nagavagar nodded. A gap-toothed grin spread across Ollie's face. I'll let him know, sir. Nagavagar took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. This may take a while, but don't worry. We'll get this fixed as soon as possible. So you all take the rest of the day off. The workers did not quite know how to respond. With pay, he said with a sigh. And the crowd cheered, even as most of them stayed. There was entertainment value to what was happening now. Gazlo, working on the engine, smiled in the darkness of the machine's underbelly. His plan had worked. Hey, Noggenfogger, he called out. You want to see how to fix one of these things? Excuse me. Nagenvager stooped beside him. Yeah, he said, peering into the open engine compartment where the Tinkers were gathered around Gazlo. I'd appreciate it. Gazlo grinned. Maybe his was going to work even better than he thought. After his team added a greasy solution of one thing, replaced a few stripped gears and cracked bolts and gaskets, as well as doing some preventative maintenance, Gazlo turned the final screw, stood, and wiped his hands on his pants. That should do it, he nodded, and a machinist pulled the lever. The machine began to rumble and putter before it let out a healthy whirl. Nagenvager let out a sigh of relief. The workers looked on in a bit of shock and surprise, while those who had helped out from the inside congratulated each other. One of the elixirs wore off, and they regained their size. Nagenvager's bottom lip puckered out as he regarded the empty case of his famous elixir. Then he studied Gazlo warily. You're serious. You want to help, not take over. Gazlo nodded. Knew you weren't dense. Thought you may want to reconsider wearing white when making your rounds next time. Nagenvager sagged a bit. Okay, I admit I could use the help. But you know how tough it is to change things. Could I pay my people more? Some, I guess. At that, a few workers within earshot gave him reproachful looks. Healthcare. I don't even know what that looks like. But we could find a place for a clinic or something. Maintenance, I get. But I don't have enough tinkers as it is. And the ones I got ain't worth a bucket of warm spit. The tinker behind him scowled, mumbling a profanity before stalking off. Gazlo shrugged. Or they're feeling misused and therefore not giving you their best. And maybe you don't remember what this is like, Mr. Horde Counselor, Nagenvager said. But I got people around me. People who don't like profit margins getting eaten into. If I can't produce, they'll find someone who can. Can you help with that? Besides, if word gets out I'm going soft, what happens then? Then you got an opportunity to show him what's what. Nagenvager's nostrils flared. I'm serious, Gazlo. You know what I'm talking about. Other cartels, other trade princes, always looking for some sign of weakness to pounce. And you know they'd see me doing all that, costing us money, and going for the kill. Gazlo took that in. Okay, you may have a point there. Damn straight I do. What if Steamwhittle had Bilgewater backing your pay? Oh, sorry, try that again. What if Steamwhittle had Bilgewater backing your play, taking a little heat off of you? The two biggest cartels working together? Then you'd be working from a position of strength. Nagenvager weighed the offer, weighed his trust. In the meantime, Gazlo added, maybe you could put that big alchemy brain to work on the opposite of a poison. What, an antidote? No, genius. Cures for diseases, health potions, medicines. Oh, right. Well, I already got some things in the works. You weren't thinking for free, were you? Gazlo crossed his arms. Sure was. But I'd consider it more an investment than a giveaway. Nagenvager cursed under his breath. Lot of work, but yeah. Fine. His eyes lit up. Plus, it's a whole new revenue stream. Let him call me soft then. He looked at Gazlo. You don't want a commission on that, do you? Gazlo chuckled. I'll give you that one for free. Nagenvager nodded, now grateful. I guess. I appreciate you coming down here after all. Gazlo regarded Nagenvager. Humility is a rare quality in a goblin, especially in a boss. Tells me you're not a lost cause. Nagelfagger squinted. I'm not sure whether you just complimented me or insulted me. Gazlo smacked his lips. What about that drink? Why will you show me the real books? Nagelfagger winced. You saw through that one, huh? Gazlo sipped from his glass of Badlands bourbon in Nagelfagger's well-appointed office, which overlooked the mining operations like an eyrie. Nagelfagger had opened the ledgers, the real ones this time, he assured Gazlo, and it was pretty much as Gazlo had suspected. Grafting, insufficient reinvestment, skimming from the workers. Standard operating procedure for Goblin bigwigs for as long as Gallywix had held the reins. In fact, it wasn't just Nagelfagger taking a bite out of profits. Other bosses were as well, meaning it could be dangerous for Nagelfagger to rock the boat. If so, he could lose more than money by making it stop. I see room for improvement. You see how much I need to do? Nagelfagger leaned back into his armchair. Even if I play it totally straight, upgrading the machinery, putting all those safety regs in place, healthcare, paying folks more, I'm going to be in the red in no time. Rebuilding this place? It's going to cost a fortune, and it's not just my profits that'll be affected. Maybe things are different in the Horde, but the other goblins, even trade princes, have others trying to get their cut, and everyone who gets a cut will be looking to get things back to the old way. Gazlo sipped his drink. Like I said, I got a reputation as someone who gets things done where the Horde is concerned. Nagelfagger wrapped his long nails on the wood desk. Thought you sold to both sides. At a certain point, I realized that while gold might spend the same, what happened with the things the gold bought didn't always feel right. Something changed in me after Garrosh was defeated, and I got summoned to repair the damage he left behind in Ogremar. You've been? Nagelfagger shook his head. Gazlo continued. I was chief engineer there for a while before I started up Ratchet for Steamweedle. Thrall himself asked me to survey the damage. You've met Thrall, right? Thrall the war chief? He's not war chief anymore. Nagelfagger grimaced. I've seen him from a distance once or twice. The guy's larger than life. Not that I'd ever tell him this, but I was still a little in awe. I've seen plenty of leaders who ruled by violence and fear, or by outmaneuvering their opponents and their friends. Seen leaders who ruled through a moral arm twisting. But Thrall, he's different. He's decent. Nagelfagger cocked a skeptical bushy eyebrow. I mean, not for nothing, but he named the city after his best friend. He named the continent after his dad. Gazlo considered that. Yeah, okay, fair point. But they had to name things something. Anyway, Thrall could have been war chief as long as he wanted. He could have ruled the Horde, and maybe the world, but he never seemed to want it. And he's so earnest. Nagelfagger gesturedly impatiently. So he brought you in, gave you the 5 copper tour, and the place was a mess. But between all that destruction, I noticed Thrall greeting people by name. Hundreds of people. Somehow we knew the names of folks so far beneath the station that they should have been invisible. The big guy just radiated compassion, empathy. Whatever it was, I've never encountered it from anyone before. And everywhere he went, these people who had their homes, their lives, everything destroyed, they trusted him to set it right. That trust, it was something I didn't see enough of between our people. We finished the tour. The drag, the bank, the Valley of Strength, the Zeppelin Tower, and he asked me how much it'll cost to rebuild it all. Better than it was, Gazlo concluded. Now I realize he's in a bind, and he came to me because, well, I'm the best. Plus, I've helped him out before. He trusts me. You had him over a barrel. That's one way to look at it. The thing is, the way I wanted to do it, mixing materials, building stronger, and whatnot, means more labor, more machines, higher shipping costs, and so on. And I gotta make a profit too. I got mouths to feed. So I give Thrall my bid for the gig. You should have seen his face. Didn't go for it? He was set back on his heels. Hard. But I explained what needed done, and he agreed to convince the horde. Magnifier flashed his teeth. Sucker. The point, Gazla rubbed his forehead, frustrated, is he treated me as an expert, a master of my craft. I named the figure, and even though he was unhappy about it, he didn't haggle or argue me down. He showed me respect. The leader of the whole frickin' horde. I guess that's hard to come by. It's exceedingly rare, my friend, and hard earned. But you and your crew at least gave them their money's worth. Gazlo gazed at Noggenfogger, who now seemed even more receptive to the message he needed to convey than he seemed earlier. I gotta tell you something I never told anyone before, he said, leaning in. Noggenfogger leaned in. This is where big picture thinking comes in, he explained. Since he showed me respect, he made me want to earn his respect. What I understood at that moment was Thrall would do anything for his people, and I was going to do everything in my power to make sure that my people did the best work we've ever done. That's what he does. You get to know him, and he makes you want to live up to his standards. And unlike Gallywix. Well, like I said, Gallywix was a sociopath. He offered to do it cheaper, but no. Thrall came to me. So what'd you do? Gazlo made Noggenfogger wait for it. I dropped my price for him. Noggenfogger stared, then shook his head. Gazlo chuckled. You should have seen his face then. Like it didn't compute that a goblin's first, last, and only thought wasn't just filthy lucre. You're telling me you didn't make bank on the job? Oh, I made a profit. Just not as much as I could have. Point is, I made the war chief respect me more. And I assumed he didn't keep it to himself. I'm hoping it was the first step to changing how everyone else sees in the horde sees us. And maybe how we start looking at ourselves. He pointed down at the repaired shearing machine. That accident down there? There was an accident we were rebuilding too. Folks from all the races of the horde pitched in to help and get things back on track. Everyone and everything was taken care of. Seeing that changed how I looked at the world and what I wanted out of it. To be part of something bigger than outdoing the guy next to me, Gazlo continued. My whole crew will tell you we were proud of the job we did, and we were even prouder that we did it for the horde. He tipped his glass to Noggenfogger. Now I want to share that with you. Noggenfogger frowned. Want me to be proud of being a goblin? I want all of us. Gazlo waved his hand to indicate all goblins in general. To be proud of being goblins. I want us to be proud of what we can build. And I want the horde to be proud to be associated with us. I want us to start looking to the future, to stop treating each other as enemies, and understand that not everything is transactional or a zero-sum game. He leaned back and put up his feet. What we did back there at the site, did you see how that mattered? Yes? No? I don't know. How? Gazlo gave a genial smile. Because nothing changes the atmosphere. Nothing gains your respect like a boss who wants to help and is willing to learn and compromise. It'll move mountains. Nagenfager squinted at Gaslow. I just still can't figure out your angle. No angle, buddy. If we don't start helping each other, we're going to tear each other apart until there's nothing left of us. Nagenfager didn't argue now. He looked as introspective as he was ever going to look. At that, he raised his glass. To a new way. To a new way. Damn, that was good. So that was the Goblin Way, and looks like that. Um, I always thought that Gallywix was kind of stand-in for Bobby Kotick. I mean, they do kind of look the same, no? So I kind of like this, or I hope they actually have this in the game itself. Oh, it's one of the last stories by Christy Golden you got right here. It's called The Calling, and it's Anduin centric. Shall we? There we go. I don't know where the fox came from. Strange little fox. Fox baby. All right. One of the final jewels that Christy Golden has left us. All right, let's go. Wind caressed the newcomers' bearded faces. He permitted his eyes, so hungry for green openness and soft lands, to feast. Stormstone Valley was an ancient home of the Tide Sages, mages whose mastery of water and wind had protected ships and sailors for generations. Yet the beauty of this little hamlet near the sparkling sea was not that of majestic mountains too powerful magic. Here it was obvious one was in the bread box of Coltirus, where a salt spray wind whispered over barley and wheat, and the only magic that was that of water and windmills, creaking from morn till night, transmuting elements to energy in service of feeding and care of ordinary folk. The pleasant sounds of the mills sang a promise of new beginnings, and the crash of the waves below, near the cave where his belongings lay bundled and buried, spoke of an ending. Anduin Rin's recent wanderings had not taken him to peaceful places. He understood that he was trying to scour himself, to purge his mind and soul, to burn away his sins in places where the landscape reflected his own suffering. My friends, the ones I almost killed, they believe my hands are clean, but they don't feel clean. Years after that confession, they still didn't. Hands that had once warmed with the holy light, healed body and spirit, protected a kingdom, a world. He flexed them now. He and his hands were anxious to keep busy. As a boy, Anduin had yearned to travel Azeroth, seizing what chances he could, manufacturing them sometimes, in search of adventure. Now he sought to escape, not explore. Adrift, alone, he turned his hand to whatever would earn him that day's meal and a place to sleep, even if sleep was a capricious comfort. Slumber sent night terrors from which Anduin would waken, screaming as often as not, rather than gifting him true rest, or even simple oblivion. In a way, his waking mind was a better friend. There were many places Anduin knew his feet had trod, but he had only fragments of memories of them. Sometimes his mind restored them to him, in the form of moments where he seemed to relive the very thing he did not wish to remember, the recollection more horrifying than the original wound. Changing his environment helped, as did learning something new, keeping his hands busy, playing a game of hide and seek with personal demons, much worse than true ones. Then on to the next place, and the next. Anduin had kept himself on the voyage to Coltiris as he always did. He stayed in his cabin, venturing topside only when the walls of the cabin closed in and the air stank of his own fear and sour sweat. He silently observed the sailors making knots, then fashioned his own, a skill he would take from the trip. Once the ship had docked, Anduin slipped into a dark corner of a tavern and ordered a bowl of stew. He was not among those who sought solace at the bottom of a tankard. He acknowledged there was some temptation in the thought of drinking deeply enough to drown the dreams of his body moving against his wishes, of watching his hands curl around the hilt of his father's corrupted blade. But he knew the only thing worse than living with those memories would be losing control. Anduin ate the meal without tasting it, listening to news, gossip, and who needed what done where, and he learned that Storm Song Valley was flourishing so well that there was lack of strong backs willing to help with harvests, tend the land, or grind the grain. The long walk from Borealis to the valley had calmed him, each step bearing him from the bustle of the harbor into silence, stillness, and a steady rhythm of the sea. "That's my favorite view," came a voice from behind. Anduin rolled, reaching for the sword that was not there, the sword that was safely hidden in a cave below his feet, the sword that hung over head and heart. Seeing his startlement, the approaching figure, a man of middle years, held up a hand and smiled reassuringly. He had bright blue eyes, and what little hair he had left was nearly all gray. "My apologies. Seems even with this leg I could still move quietly." He gestured, and Anduin could see by the way the man hobbled, leaning on a staff for aid, that the leg had once been badly broken and had not mended fully. "I could help," he thought, then remembered that time was over. The man continued, "I proposed to my wife here, saw my last sunset before I left for the Fourth War, and the first when I made it home. When you've seen what I've seen..." He sighed and fell silent. Anduin was glad the stranger did not finish his sentence. "Well, the heart longs for quiet, simple beauty, things that grow and change, and things that don't. I'm Roderick Felden, by the way." Jarek. Anduin had used this alias before, starting in simpler times as a youth, running from responsibility. He was running from much darker things now. "I'm looking for work." "I'm looking for help. What's your calling, Jarek?" The casual question was unexpected, and for a moment Anduin couldn't breathe. A calling. He thought of the priesthood and of Aaron Stonehand, the young Ironforge warrior assigned to train him in the art of the sword. He had promised to dwarf temper him, but instead realized the prince was not suited to cause pain, to harm. Aaron believed that Anduin might thrive in service to the light. So had Magni Bronzebeard. Anduin had believed it too once. He always felt drawn to the peace it offered, the stillness. "My whole life I wanted peace," he thought. "And my whole life I've never had it." Fields by the ocean, open sky, open land, hard physical labor. Maybe this place, this job, would help. Light knew, nothing else had. Anduin realized his mind had wandered and Roderick was waiting for his answer. "I'm a jack of all trades," he said. Off Roderick's bemused gaze, he added, "I learn fast, my back's strong, and I work hard." Roderick took in Anduin's tattered cloak and mud-sweater boots, his unkempt beard and dirty hair. "Looks like you come from a long way, son. Where have you traveled from?" Anduin bristled, alert. "Does it matter?" Roderick fixed him a long, appraising gaze. "You seem a bit on edge," he remarked, "and hungry. Here, this might help." He reached into his pack and procured a loaf of bread. Anduin took it. The loaf was still warm, and the smell made his stomach rumble. Roderick nodded toward the windmills dotting the landscape. Their arms turned and creaked, but there was a lone water mill some distance away. A channel diverted the river's stream toward a huge wheel. Bags of wheat and barley were piled high beside it, waiting to be milled, and chickens pecked industriously at stray grains. A short walk away was a small, cheerful-looking cottage, where a horse, goat, and her kid cropped in the nearby grass. "The watermill's mine. You'll have plenty of bread and goat's milk, eggs too, if you keep the fox away. If you work hard, which you say you want, and pay you fairly. You'll need training, of course, but if you're a quick learner, it won't take long. After that, I'll be by once or twice a week with supplies." Roderick went over Anduin's list of responsibilities: checking the millstones, grinding the grains to flour, maintaining machinery, taking orders. Wait, Anduin interrupted. His throat tightened. He hadn't thought this through. "The farmers will bring the grain here? How many? How often?" He could hear his voice rising with agitation and feel his palms starting to sweat. He had sought isolation, but this sounded like it would provide exactly the opposite. Anduin felt himself shutting down, as if one by one doors inside him were closing. This place, pleasant as it seemed, didn't have the answers after all. "Oh, I used to be interrupted all the time, but I moved my family into town after the war. My wife runs a bakery now. I do all the boring work, and I'll handle the orders. I turned over the hard part to the young and strong." Roderick chuckled ruefully. "It was a good idea in theory, but I can't keep anyone for long. It gets too lonely here. So I hear. I'll take it." As Roderick had warned, there was training, quite a lot of it. The older man taught him how to listen to the mill, to know when something was off, and how to repair the intricate machinery, how to test the grind of the flour by the millet's rule of thumb, to feel it between thumb and forefinger, and how to inspect the grindstones themselves, how to milk the goats, saddle the horse, and make a snare to catch the fox if it bothered the chickens. Anduin paid keen attention. The sooner Roderick deemed his new hand ready, the sooner Anduin would have his privacy. He was silent except to ask or answer questions, but Roderick didn't seem to mind. He chatted amiably, mostly about his family, his wife Vera, who not only managed the bakery, but was also a baker herself, their son Ben, a decade younger than Anduin, and their daughter Cinda. "She's still a child yet, but smarter than most adults I know. Gets that from her mother." And her father smiled, his eyes full of pride. Anduin stayed silent. His own family had been nothing like Roderick's. His mother had died shortly after he was born, lost to violence. His father had been hurting, distant, and for many years gone. When Roderick spoke of his service in the Fourth War, Anduin withdrew even further. "There weren't an awful lot of professional soldiers in Kultiris right before the war began," Roderick said as Anduin sifted various grains of flour through his fingers. "The majority were drafted. Most from around here weren't all that familiar with weapons of war. We're farmers, builders, beekeepers. You should have seen the first time I held a sword." He chuckled, then grew serious, his eyes somber. "I learned how to use it pretty well, though." Edwin's breath caught and his heart hammered. Bodies, wrapped in white, laid out on the weathered boards of the harbor. A pitiful few soldiers in armor waiting to board, and Gen's words: "That's the last of the soldiers. We'll be calling up farmers next." "Jarek?" "Sorry," Anduin stammered, staring at his hand clenched tightly around a fistful of flour. He let it fall, and muttering an excuse, strode quickly out of the mill house, his lungs suddenly tight and hungry for air. Once his training was complete, Anduin's days were filled with the simplicity of hoisting stacks and pouring grain into the hopper, bagging flour, maintaining the equipment, and tending the animals. Through every hour ran the rhythmic, soothing splash of the water wheel. The only thing on Roderick's list that Anduin had neglected to accomplish was the snare for the fox. Thus far, it had left the chickens alone, and Anduin disliked the idea of killing the creature after all, let alone for something it might do. He was also aware that he couldn't keep an eye on the birds all the time, and foxes were sometimes active during daylight hours. At first, Anduin had only heard its sharp yips and barks at twilight. Then on nights he stayed out to stargaze, Anduin often caught sight of a shadowy shape just beyond the ring of firelight and a pair of glowing eyes analyzing him with no hint of fear. One night, on impulse, Anduin sliced off a piece of meat from the roasting stick. "Hey, fox," he said, and tossed it to the creature. It danced out of the way, confused, but quickly realized its error. It gulped down the morsel, then darted off. It returned the following night, though, sitting gracefully with its forepaws together and its bushy tail curled around them, as if he were properly introducing itself to him. "I shouldn't feed you, fox," Anduin said. Its ears flickered as it listened. Strange to hear his own voice. He had said as few words to Roderick as possible and stayed silent otherwise. A pink tongue crept out to lick a smudgy black muzzle. "I really shouldn't feed you," Anduin thought, but he did. I wondered why. His nightmares had eased ever so slightly with this regimen of physical labor, solitude, and simple tasks, but they had not disappeared, nor had shame, or the gulf of regret and remorse. Often he felt an invisible weight as heavy as the millstone, and equally capable of crushing him. No, it was best to just take things day by day, hour by hour, task by task, keeping his hands busy. Anduin looked forward to the nights when he was too tired to dream. The content of the dreams varied, but the one constant thread was violence. His violence. Anduin was as helpless in these dreams as he had been when he performed the brutal acts. Sometimes the dreams took the form of flashbacks, paralyzing him in a dreadful state between past and present. The dreams were terrifying when they devastated him and racked him with guilt. They were worse when they didn't. Thunk. The axe bit deep into the wood, splitting it cleanly as Anduin's body moved in a practiced rhythm. Strike, reset, strike, reset, new log, thunk, strike. Small forms, gossamer wings so fragile, the eyes wide, wider in terror. Reset, thunk. The sword, so like the one in his father's fist, but twisted, blasphemed, glowing not red, not golden, but blue. Pretty, almost, wasn't it? Plunging in, serrated blade piercing, then sawing as it was withdrawn. The wise-eyed blank and the scream. Musical, abominable, the scream. Anduin staggered back, his throat raw, his mouth open and gasping for breath. The log at his feet was not simply split, but reduced to tiny slivers of kindling. His hand still gripped the handle, aching, the knuckles wide, and he threw the axe as if it had burned him. It landed harmlessly in the dirt, but Anduin had not even looked before he had thrown it. His legs felt weak as he sat down, placing both trembling hands on the good, rich soil. He couldn't be trusted. He didn't know when he was going to lose control. The thoughts, like predators sensing weakness, pressing into his mind. What if I call the light and it doesn't answer? He felt no brush, no hint of it. Even the ache in his light-mended bones had vanished, and with it any hope of guidance. Which of us, the jailer, the soul within the shard, me, felt that awful thrill of exhilaration? What if I take a life and I feel pleasure? Anduin dug his fingers deeper into the loam, grounding himself in all ways, and took a few slow, deep breaths. These waking nightmares were rarer than the dreaming ones, fortunately. At night there was less of a chance he'd hurt anyone. He'd been very lucky just now. He could have damaged a building, the livestock, or worse. Roderick hadn't come by today. What if he had decided to show at that exact dizzying moment, had stolen upon Anduin in that quiet way of his? Anduin got to his feet, drank deeply from the water skin, and wiped his face, then glanced at the road and grimaced. As if on cue, Roderick was approaching with Anduin's twice-weekly supplies. There was nothing unusual in that, but the sky was already turning lavender. Anduin rinsed his hands and face and braced himself, hoping he didn't look too distraught. He'd do what he could to make this quick. "You're later than usual," he said as he began to unload the wagon. "Won't you be late for dinner?" "Not tonight." Roderick shot him an impish smile, then carefully climbed out of the vehicle. "I hope you're hungry. We, my young friend, are about to dine on Vera Felden's world-famous spring vegetable stew and berry pie." No, that's all right. I don't need." Roderick limped up to Anduin. "Everything came out of the oven less than an hour ago. You're not going to make me go home and tell Vera I didn't feed you, are you?" There was, of course, no answer other than acquiescence. As Anduin put away the supplies, Roderick started to light the fire in the little cottage. "No," Anduin said. He didn't want to be in a small place right now. "Let's eat outside." There was a brief pause, then Roderick nodded, heading out to the fire pit instead. As Anduin emerged from the mill house, Roderick called out to him. "You're going to need to set that snare." "It's all right," he said. "He's fine." As if to confirm, the fox yipped and trotted over to him. He wouldn't let himself be petted, but ever since Anduin began feeding him in the mornings, the fox had taken to following him around during the day. "He catches rats in the mill house and leaves the chickens alone. So far," Roderick muttered. "Does he have a name?" "No." Names had significance. They implied affection, connection. Anduin would not give one to the fox. The miller placed a small cauldron over the fire and unwrapped the bread and cheese, and, as Anduin had expected, began to talk. First about the bread. It was different, with herbs. Vera was experimenting as the harvest festival was coming up in a couple weeks. Normal chit-chat for Roderick, yes, but Anduin realized that there was something off about him tonight. His amiable manner seemed forced. Both men were silent as they ate, but as Anduin ladled another serving, Roderick asked a question that was both innocent and agonizing. "Were you in the war?" Anduin froze and swallowed hard. Oh yes, he had been in the war. In many ways, Anduin felt he had been the war. He couldn't speak, but nodded. "I'm not saying it wasn't worth it to fight, but even a war worth fighting takes its tolls. Some you don't even know you've paid until afterwards, and some you just keep paying." Anduin stared at the bowl cooling in his lap. He'd been hungry a moment ago, but now the food sat rock heavy in his stomach. Cold sweat began to drip from him. "Things that you think shouldn't bother you do. Like a fire outside. There was a time where I couldn't even sit here like I'm doing now. Still don't like it much, but it's better." He took a breath, held it, and blew it out slowly. "Breathing like that helps. So does moving your body." His body, moving without his will. Anduin took a deep breath. "We were ambushed at our campfire. 3 of my friends just suddenly sprouted arrows. Fighting in the dark. Trolls are so much bigger than we were. Anyone who tried to stand against that..." Roderick paused. His face seemed pale even in the fire's glow, and he was trembling. "We ran. We had to. I know I had to. But I shouldn't have left the others behind. I Dream about it sometimes. Kingsmorn, glowing icy blue, merciful oblivion ripped away so Anduin could see, understand, his own hand on the hilt, his own blow pulling forth the sigil. Took me a long time to even tell Vera. Anduin sprang up, the bowl falling from his lap. You better get back. It's late, he said, his voice broken. He turned and strode off, breaking into a run as he went, just like the fox who followed him, running from Roderick's pain and truth, and his own. The harvest festival is tomorrow, Roderick said 2 weeks later, after Anduin had finished loading the cart with several bags of flour. Vera's making a special dessert for it, served hot right out of the oil and covered with sugar. Anduin knew the treat. Suddenly he could smell the oil, the sugar, and his mouth watered. Varian, king, father, his large, strong hands covered with the sweet powder. You can lick your fingers here, son. Manners are for formal dinners, not festivals. The taste hitting his tongue, the sound of laughter, music. Roderick must have seen him flinch. No need to come, of course, but you'd be welcome. We'll see, Anduin managed. They both knew what that meant. The wagon was ready to go, but Roderick, in the front seat, did not slap the reins to signal the horse to depart. Anduin tensed. Jarek, about our last conversation, shame washed through Anduin. I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. That was my error. Confused, Anduin stayed silent. Roderick shook his balding head sadly. I see me in you, Jarek. In those times when you get angry or can't breathe or just plain want me gone, I recognize it when you shake and sweat and seem to see things I can't. I wanted you to know I don't judge anybody for what war or anything else might have done to them, so I told you my story. Some of it, at any rate. And it made you think of your own at that moment when you weren't expecting to. Anduin, the diplomat, the peacemaker, who once would have gracefully deflected the words and promised all was well, couldn't speak. Roderick held out a folded piece of parchment. I wrote down some thoughts about my own experience. Some things I've learned that might help you. You don't have to read it, and you don't have to say a word. But if you do, you know I'm here. Anduin swallowed. He stepped forward, alert and cautious, just like the fox had been at first. The parchment cracked slightly as he took it. Roderick visibly relaxed and gave him one of his easy smiles. I'll make sure Vera saves some pastries for you, he said, clicked his tongue. The horse blew, tossed her mane, and began to trot down the road. Anduin looked at the letter, put it in his pocket unread, and lifted a sack of grain. The following day was perfect for an autumn harvest festival, crisp and bright, the sun's warmth staving off the slight chill that heralded the winter to come. Anduin spent most of the morning inside the mill house, tinkering with the gears. He finally finished and stepped outside. Black smoke roiled in the distance as lighter smoke stained the sky. The festival. Roderick. A deep instinct, the need to help, drove Anduin's next movements, and before he quite realized what he was doing, he had leaped atop the startled wagon horse and was urging her on top speed toward his friend and his family. Anduin had steeled himself for a scene of chaos. Roderick had mentioned hot oil. There must have been an accident, a fire spreading from a makeshift hearth. Anduin could and would help. It was nothing so innocuous. Another inferno raged. Through gaps in the smoke, Anduin saw that some festival structures were already consumed and others were fiery skeletons on the verge of collapse. Even the banners were ablaze, and Anduin stared, frozen, almost hypnotized, watching a flag of House Stormstrong curl and twist, blackening as flames licked it. Shapes on the ground. Bodies, Anduin realized. One, just there, burned. Charred meat left too long on a spit. Screams on his left as two shapes, a blanket draped over them, emerged from the black smoke. Waiting, watching Safety and Sorwin while a world tree burned and too many tried to flee through too few portals. Anduin, startled, cried out just as his terrified horse reared and threw him. His head struck something hard. Everything went white for a moment, then dissolved into flashes of light like stars. Anduin tried to rise, but the world was spinning. He couldn't see the two figures anymore, but a third stumbled out of the enveloping smoke. Anduin thought he saw someone behind her, quickly glimpsed and quickly gone. Perhaps not even there. The woman clutched an infant, shielding it as best she could. The child, born by a queen, brought to a priestess, the last survivor. The woman dropped like a stone. The baby cried, coughing, more shouting, laughter, screaming. Pain thundered in his skull. Anduin clapped his hands to his ears, the gesture slicking his fingers with blood. He looked around wildly, trying and failing to focus, the coughing that racked his body only increasing the agony. The stench of blood and the cacophony of slaughter made his heart slam against his chest. The stars started to fade, and Anduin now glimpsed wagons filled with food and supplies waiting out of the reach of the greedy flames. The drivers finally allowed the maddening horses a chance to run, and the wagons careened off. A few of the raiders lingered, barely visible through the smoke, wanting more sport. And then Roderick. Anduin shook violently. His limbs struggled to obey him, and his head threatened unconsciousness as he tried to rise. So he crawled, keeping his face close to the ground, trying to breathe. Everything in him shouted, "Run! Run!" But he clenched his teeth against another scream and willed himself to keep going. Impossibly, more folk emerged from the fire. Some stumbled as if someone had pushed them from behind. How were they still alive? Soot, smoke, and tears stung Anduin's eyes, and he was glad of it, glad of the pain, the blurring, so he could not see what horrors the fire had wrought upon the figures. The baby was still crying, coughing, and someone swooped down to pick it up and flee. Other figures emerged from the billowing black clouds, burned, but not as badly as others. Something about how he, moved the right leg. "Roderick!" he tried to shout, but all that came out was a ragged sound. "I'm not too late. I can help him. Roderick crumpled to the ground. Anduin had no memory of how he crossed the distance between him and his fallen friend. The next thing he knew, he was kneeling beside the miller, staring at the blackened flesh, the blue eyes in a sooty face, the well of blood plumping up between his own fingers as he pressed to staunch the flood. To call, he gasped, pulling his hands back, his body shaking. He couldn't help Roderick. Not now. "Anduin, do something. Do something." "I can't," he rasped over and over, his voice a sob. He reached out again to lay his hands on the wound to form a prayer. "It won't come. Not to me. Not any more." Again he snatched his useless hands back, curling them into fists and pounding them on his thighs with all the force of his rage and helplessness and loathing. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Whisper. "It's all right." Anduin shook his head. Roderick's hand twitched, and Anduin took it, his heart tearing itself apart as Roderick cried out at the touch. The dying man gripped all the harder. "Family. In town." A bout of coughing threatened to tear him apart as blood and specks of ash burst from his mouth. It took the last of his energy, but even so, Roderick fought to speak. Anduin stilled him, able to at least grant him peace here at the end. "I will take care of them," Anduin said. "I will. I promise." Roderick heard him. His taut, tormented body eased, closed his eyes, and was gone. Ben Felden had his father's eyes, also his father's old war pistol, which was now aimed at the stranger who stood at the doorstep. Anduin, hands raised, was acutely aware of the picture he presented. His clothing filthy with ashes and wet with blood, Roderick's blood. Roderick, whom he had wrapped in a single blanket and placed down so gently before knocking at the Feldons' door. My name is Jarek, from the mill. Fortunately, Ben recognized the name and lowered his pistol. He too bore signs of the fire, a minor burn on one arm and a singed shirt. They must have escaped while Roderick had remained behind. Roddy? A woman rushed up, looking past him, hoping against hope to see a beloved face. Vera. Her black hair was turning gray, but Anduin observed that her face was remarkably unlined, until her gaze fell on her husband's body. Realization spread over her face, the pain aging her, dimming her light as she sank down beside the corpse, placed a hand on a still form about her head. For a moment Anduin thought he couldn't keep the wall up, but he knew that if it came down, something inside him would collapse like the burning structures at the festival, in flames and beyond repair. Thank you, child. Vera's voice shook, but it was kind. Bless you for bringing him. He did promise he'd come home. Why didn't he let me go with him? Ben's voice was full of pain and anger. He wanted us to be safe. We could have all been safe, but he just had to. Ben's face crumpled and he turned away. Roderick, the soldier who had been ambushed at a campfire, who, this time, had decided he couldn't leave anyone behind. Anduin heard the urgent thump of small feet, and a little girl appearing at the door. Her hair was braided with now drooping peace-bloom flowers, her soot-smudged face clean only where her tears had run. Daddy? Oh, Cinda. Honey, no. I failed you, all of you. The wall inside Anduin trembled. Roderick had wished to be buried near the cliff where he and Vera had pledged themselves to each other years ago, when they were only a little older than Ben. Anduin dug the grave himself. There was no need to trouble anyone else, and he wanted to do it. As he worked, he thought of his belongings far below the 6 feet of earth he would move. He would never know if the light would have saved Roderick and had to live with the knowledge that he had been too afraid to ask. Anything he could do, large or small, to help the bereaved family he would, except for one thing. He would not attend the funeral. He could not bear to be near anyone wielding the light. Not now. Perhaps not ever. That day he walked. The fox followed, Anduin's little shadow. He didn't return until twilight, to make sure everyone was long gone. To his surprise, there was a box at the cottage door. A small slip of parchment read, For you, Jarek, thank you. The box was full of bread, cheese, vegetables, and some meat wrapped in waxed fabric, even scraps for the fox. Picked up a piece. Hey, fox, he said, and fed him the morsel. The note reminded Anduin of the one Roderick had left him, forgotten until this moment. He retrieved it and looked at it for a moment. Jarek, we've both known war. It does things to you. You've got a right to whatever you feel. Mad, sad, scared. I felt all that and then some. I know you better than you might think. It's clear how much you care about doing a good job with the mill. I see your patience and good character in how you treat that fox. A man who will take time to be kind to animals, especially after what I think you've been through, is rare. And his heart's still good, whatever he thinks. It helped me to talk with Vera, and it was my hope you'd talk to me. If not, I hope someday you do find someone you trust. Because if you keep a lid on a boiling pot, someone's going to get hurt, and it might not be you. I guess I'll just close with this. Sometimes we have to do terrible things, and sometimes terrible things are done to us. Neither makes us bad people, but we can't run forever. If you can't believe in your own worth right this moment, find someone who does. They'll hold that knowledge safe for you till you're ready to see it too. And when the darkness grabs you and you feel like you'll never ever be free of it, know that you have a chance and a choice every single day to look it in the eye and call it a liar. Some days you can't make that choice, but another day, maybe you can. Eat Vera's good food, swim in the sea and sleep and work. Do a little good when you can, how you can, for who you can. And come have dinner with us one of these days. Ben wanted to take over his father's task of bringing grain to the mill, but Andwin would not let him. Instead, he came down himself for supplies. It was the least he could do for them, for Roderick. On this first trip, Vera insisted to come into the bakery for tea and smell pastries. She wanted him to understand what had happened. Word of the area's bounty had reached the ears of some raiders, she said. Rats on a ship, I tell you, Jarek. There's no monster in the ocean's deep crueler than the ones that sail its surface. Roddy brought us home in the wagon, then went back to save as many others as he could. Said he wasn't going to run this time. She bit her lip. If we did have to lose him, I hope he was able to, for he was, Anduin said quietly. He did. He saw her brow relax only a little and knew the words had given her a little bit of peace. Over time, a new rhythm and routine took form. Anduin still worked the mill, but at dusk more often than not. He would sit beside his friend's grave. The fox accompanied him, nestled against him. Sometimes Anduin would speak, as if Roderick were still there, listening. Quiet confessions, questions that Roderick would never answer. Other times angry outbursts, or he reread the letter and remembered to breathe. On his visits to town, Anduin would occasionally help Ben with paperwork or loading and unloading the wagons. Now and then Vera asked for assistance kneading the dough. After a while, Anduin realized she sneakily taught him how to bake. She and Ben wanted to talk about Roderick, which Anduin resisted at first, but over time he realized he wanted to hear those stories. They were little ones mostly, a brilliant quip at the right time, patience with a child's rebelliousness, Hal's Zen costume gone awry. Only Cinda seemed disinclined to talk about her father. Vera confided to Anduin that she was glad that Cinda had been so young when it happened. Less to miss, Vera said with a sad smile. But Anduin had often visited Stormwind City's orphanage. He had spent time with refugees who had fled to his city after their home had burned. Intimately familiar with the strange ways of grief and guilt, he wasn't so sure about Vera's statement. He wanted to believe she was right, but that fragile hope was dashed one deceptively calm morning, along with a teapot Cinda grabbed and hurled to the floor. Cinda! Vera shuddered. That was a wedding gift from your father. I know, Cinda shrieked back. He's not here to care about it, so why should you? He didn't care about us. She seized one of the matching teacups and hurled it to the floor as well, deftly eluding her mother's grasp and racing outside. Cinda! Vera cried, staring after her. Let her go, Anduin said, and Vera turned, looked at him sharply. I know what she said is hurtful, but let her feel what she needs to. Vera softened. Surprising himself and her both, Anduin continued, My mother died when I was a baby, and my father... His throat was tight, but something inside him pushed to keep going. Something happened to him, and he left when I was around Cinda's age. He came back, things were better, but it's hard to understand complicated situations when you're so young. She'll come back. She'll talk to you when she can. She knows you. Love her was what she wanted to say, but couldn't. Vera's sweet smile returned. You're right. Hard to remember to breathe when you're in the thick of it. You're a good man, Jarek. Roddy was right about you. You're welcome here any time. He stammered his thanks and departed. On his next visit, he brought the fox with him. The animal was skittish, but Anduin knew a way around it. plucking a berry from a bowl on the table, and said, "Hey, fox!" and got and that got okay. That's an error there. That got the fox's attention, and the berry rapidly vanished into the fox's mouth. I like berries too, Cinda said, delighted, and quickly emulated both the fox and Anduin, popping some berries into her mouth while offering a handful to the appreciative creature. No berry pie today, I guess, but it's worth to see his smile, Vera said, smiling herself. Come sit with me for a moment, Jarek. Tell me what you think of this. It's got honey and flowers in it. The little roll looked small in his large palm. It smelled wonderful, and for the first time in a while, Edwin felt real pleasure at the flavor. He finished it in 2 bites. Vera's eyes crinkled, and she handed him another one. He likes you, Edwin said to Cinda. The fox was presenting his white belly for the girl to rub. When she did, the fox squirmed with delight, emanated a high-pitched, squeaky cackle. He's laughing, Cinda said, laughing along with him. Still grinning, she looked up at Anduin, and her smile turned up a bit. Mama told me about your mama and papa. I'm sorry. Surprised, Anduin looked over at Vera. It helped, Vera said, for her to hear that. I miss Papa a lot, Cinda said. She was still petting the fox. Mama said that won't go away, but it'll get easier. We have each other, looking at Anduin sad but smiling. Don't we? Anduin was about to reply when he realized that she was including him. Oh, no, little one. No, I don't. One day I'll let you down too, just as I have everyone else. Time passed. Anduin worked, keep his hands busy. The nightmares dwindled further, becoming rare. The anxiety that sometimes descended out of nowhere eased its grip on his soul. And the flashbacks, those shattering raw moments of hellish memory, seemed far too real, all but ceased. In the end, as part of him has always known would happen, it did not last. They would die at his hands, his friends, those who believed in him, who were trying to save him. He failed them. The smoke, the infant crying, calling for help as best as it could. Anduin bolted up. The crying was coming from the fox, who whimpered and pawed at him. His ears were flat against his head. Something was very wrong. Anduin shook off the dream almost physically, stroking the animal to reassure him as he got to his feet and looked out the window. In the south, a thin gray pillar stretched upward. Smoke. No, Anduin whispered. His legs trembled. He couldn't fail them, not again. He couldn't bear it. And yet still his legs were moving, dreading every twitch of muscle, racing now to the wagon horse, racing now to the bundle he buried, even as he couldn't unwrap the sword for fear of gripping its hilt. What if he couldn't stop? What if he took too much pleasure in hefting it once more? There was no way to be safe, to ensure he stayed in control. And still he rode toward the village, for Vera and Ben and little Cinda, and the promise he made to a man who understood him, who trusted him, when he had no reason to, when he couldn't know what Anduin had done, how he so deeply betrayed his every charge and duty. At the festival, the smoke had been black and oily, and the buildings all but gone by the time Anduin had arrived. This time everything was different. Only a few structures were burning, and the raiders were clearly only beginning their assault. The cacophony was the same, though. Laughter, screams, violence. Anduin clenched his teeth, blocking the rush of fear as with a shield. He slipped easily off the horse and sent it to safety. His right hand clenched tightly, his left coming to join it as, for the first time as he had left the realms of death, Anduin Lane Rin lifted high his father's sword, Charlemagne. So much more than a simple weapon, gloriously crafted, each part of it in harmony despite its origin as 2 individually powerful blades. Anduin stepped forward, grim-faced, devoid of armor, but hoisting the sword out of legend. The sword whose purpose he had so utterly failed, which he now lifted in hope of redemption. One of the pirates turned and paled. His eyes grew enormous. the eyes wider in terror. For a terrible instant, Anduin froze. He couldn't breathe. The brigand started to smile, lifting a cutlass. Charlemagne came down in a deceptively graceful arc, mortally wounding the man. Its perfect balance made its wielding easy, almost effortless. There was little it would not cut through, and few foes could not fell. The brutality of it stole his breath, but then muscle memory took over. Anduin struck again and again, Charlemagne almost singing in his hands as if it rejoiced in being used once more at the defense of innocence. He and his sword, for this moment, were one. Blood smattered on his face, warm and wet. It stung his eyes, seeped into his mouth. He wiped his lips and pressed on. Another fell, and another. He ceased to count, and time ceased to matter. He moved as if in a dance, without thinking, feeling only the power of his arm and hearing only the song of the sword. Anduin lunged, burying Charlemagne almost to its hilt, then yanked it freely, only to parry blows again and again. The enemy was on the ground, but Anduin continued to fight. The sword lifted and descended. A muffled voice cut through the chaos. A word, nonsense and nothing to him now, in the scarlet span of time. A name, not his, no, but he knew it. Jarek! Jarek! Anduin shouted incoherently, lifting Charlemagne to strike. Cinda stood staring up at him, her mouth open in a look of shock. But she was not afraid of him. Unthinkably, foolishly, she was not afraid, and she squeezed his arm, saying things he couldn't understand but were gentle and comforting. Anduin! The call was quiet, but the voice was not that of a child before him. It slammed into his being, shattered his thoughts into a kaleidoscope of agony and brilliant colors. It was a song with words he understood yet did not recognize, which vibrated along every nerve of his body, and the singer, the speaker, knew his true name. Anduin, it whispered, the softness laced with pain. An image filled his mind, what seemed to be a sun, white hot at its center, with hues of yellow and magenta flickering along the edges. Anduin, so beautiful, this voice, this vision, but he understood what he beheld was in danger, that at some point, perhaps soon, it might explode. It was calling him away. He was needed. No, he pleaded, to whom or what he did not know. I'm needed here, please. Anduin, came the implacable reply, and he could feel the voice's sorrow and torment. The touch on his arm galvanized him, and he started blinking, the vision retreating. Cinda was still there, her expression one of concern. Are you all right, Jarek? Anduin looked at the bodies littered around him. Avira and Ben, who huddled together, looking at him with sympathy and gratitude. The shocked faces of the townsfolk. There were no more screaming or shouting. Anduin had brought silence. How many had he killed? Without even... He stared at Charlemagne, seeing it for the first time. There was no light moving in the blade's curve. No gold. But at least blessedly, no icy blue. The sword clattered to the street as Anduin dropped to his knees, gasping, staring at Cinda. Why did you come to me? I could have killed you. She smiled a little. Because I knew you wouldn't. Anduin's eyes filled with tears. I wish I could stay, Anduin said to Roderick, to the wind, to himself. He had cleaned the blood off of Charlemagne, then retrieved pieces of his old armor from the cave, where they had lain undisturbed for what felt like a lifetime. He had tidied the cottage, fed the goats and chickens, and organized the sacks of grain. Now he sat beside his friend's grave, clad in armor, with Charlemagne on his right and the fox on the left. Eyes closed. Sorry, I skipped a bar here. Charlemagne on his right, and the fox, eyes closed as Anduin scratched his ears, on his left. But I know you would understand. Thank you for everything you taught me. He gripped Roderick's letter, then tucked it into his pocket. Suddenly the fox sat up, alert, and gazed toward the road before running toward it. Anduin thought he had made his goodbyes to the Feldons after Cinda, in her innocent faith, had broken the spell that violence had held on him. For the moment. But he was not altogether surprised to see Roderick's wagon coming up the road with all three Feldons on it. "You'd be a fool if you think we'd be letting you go without proper food and supplies," Vera said as Ben brought the wagon to a halt. Anduin stood. "I thank you, but I'll be traveling light." "My pastries are light," Vera countered. Anduin could not disagree. "Jarek," Ben said, "that sword." "Plenty of wandering adventurers fight with swords, Ben," Vera said swiftly. "You know how your father hated anyone prying." "It's all right, Ben." And oddly it was. It didn't matter now if someone recognized him or Charlemagne. "Can't you say, Jarek?" Cinda asked, racing to him. When he shook his head, she said, "Will you ever come back?" "I cannot stay," he said. You knew nothing about what awaited him, who or what was calling to him, or what it wanted. Only that it was in pain and needed help, and so he would go. I... His voice cracked as he spoke. The next thing he knew, Cinda had thrown himself at him, hugging him tight. Anduin froze, then gently, awkwardly, patted her on the back. "Let the poor boy go, Cinda," Vera said. The girl did so reluctantly. Vera handed him a bag heavy with food, water, potions, and other supplies. Anduin accepted it with a nod, then picked up Charlemagne, wrapped in his cloak. "I don't know what you're going toward, but I wish you safety and joy if you can find it." He couldn't speak, just nodded, and then quickly turned, knowing that if he lingered but a moment longer, he might not be able to leave at all. He had scarcely gone 3 steps when a red blur sped towards him and nearly knocked him down. Anduin broke. He knelt and pulled Fox, not the Fox, or a Fox, not anymore. Of course he'd gone and named him and been too foolish to see it. Into his arms. Fox licked the tears from his face as Anduin held him tightly. Where he was going, Fox must not follow. To endure whatever waited him, Anduin needed to know that his family, Fox among them, was safe and at peace. And so he picked him up and bore him to Cinda, placing him in the girl's arms. "Hold Fox tight," Anduin told her. "Don't let him follow me. He's yours now." Cinda's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, clutching the squirming creature who cried piteously, marking the girl's bare arms with welts from his claws. Alone, Anduin faced the road. His feet were heavy, but he wasn't running anymore. He was being called away from people he cared for, yes, but towards something that needed his help. He still didn't trust himself, but the people he cared for did. He would let that be enough while he struggled to find peace with his past. In the meantime, he would follow that call. Whatever, whoever, was waiting for him. So that's the cover art for the book that this is going to be all in. I guess there's going to be a couple more stories coming out. They only released 3, so I guess Moira, Thrall, and the new Lothar is going to have their own stories in it too. I find it weird that there were some of those grammatical errors. Only 2. It was weird it was in Christy Golden's story. I find that kind of odd. She's not one to do that, so I don't know where that came from. All right. All right. Last story. A Whisper of Warning. Never heard of this writer before. Delilah Dawson. I haven't heard of her before. Let's see what we got. The afternoon sun filtered through the crimson leaves overhead as Ilaria Windrunner walked the path toward Silvermoon City. In times past, happier times, she might have flown or used the portal to appear inside the city walls. But as it was, she approached warily, as if nearing a sleeping beast that did not wake gently. Once she had defended these walls, these people, but now to many she was the source of danger. Funny how she had faced the most terrifying monsters, demons, the very worst of the horde. And yet here the thought of passing through a simple gate filled her with trepidation. Turn around and leave. This place is full of enemies. Everyone hates you. Ilaria ignored the whispers. When they were this foolish, it was easy. Her boots carried her forward. Her mission could not be stopped by her own fears, much less by those who came from her connection to the void. Recently, Khadgar had summoned her to Dalaran, where he asked her to investigate something called the Dark Heart, an object that Iridikron had found within Aberrus and given to a being known as the Harbinger. For all his wisdom, Khadgar knew nothing more. Regardless, Ilaria was accustomed to acting on vague reports and would soon uncover the meaning of this new threat and end it. But first, she had to do something that worried her far more. She had to speak with her son Eretor. Whatever was coming, whatever the Dark Heart portended, she had to warn him to stay away from it. Despite their strange relationship of late, despite her spending time in the Rift to be away from Stormwind City and constantly on back-to-back missions, she could only hope her son would listen. And so she stood at the gates to the city her son called home and watched a familiar figure stalk her way. Ilaria Windrunner, have you forgotten that you were banished from Silvermoon? Lorthamar, she responded with less respect than he surely preferred. Her sights landed on his gleaming armor. Have you been demoted to guard duty? Such a petty task seems below the station of Regent Lord of Quel'Thalas. He raised the long white eyebrow. Where there is a significant threat that requires my attention, I attend. I am no threat, my old friend. At least, I would assume that if you found me threatening, you would not have invited me to your wedding. Not that your wedding was uneventful, or without its threats. I never did get to taste that exquisite lavender cake. I can direct you to the baker if you'd like to commission one similar. Lorthamar opened the gate and stood there looking somber. Why are you here, Ilaria? The city shone behind him, glimmering white walls with red-tiled roofs and gilded frames, the sun glinting off windows. A place so familiar, even if subtle differences showed in the process of reconstruction after the ravages of the Scourge. A place she had known all her life, a place she was no longer welcome. I came to see my son. I am leaving shortly on a mission, and I wish to say goodbye. An admirable reason to cross our threshold, but remember this, Ilaria. Your welcome, if one can call it that, extends only so long as the sun touches Silvermoon. Once night falls, you must leave. These were the same conditions upon which she had agreed to attend his wedding in Suramar, one day, and no later. Even as former Ranger Captain of Silvermoon and a hero, she knew the city would treat her as they treated all enemies if she were to overstay her welcome. Ilaria's chest tightened. I am no enemy. You must understand what happened at the Sunwell was an accident. Lorthamar waved a hand, cutting her off. Few others in Azeroth would dare to do so. Accident or not, the damage was done. The people do not trust you. I am still not sure I can trust you. But go and visit your son while you can. The light is already fading. Now return to the Sunwell and finish our communion. You owe Lorthamar nothing. Claim what is yours. Destroy him and take his place. He gestured to his guards to follow her. They strode away as Illyria's hands went to fists creaking in their gloves. They were both right, she and Lorthamar, and she loathed that. She was culpable for damaging the heart of her people's culture, but she truly had not known that just being near the Sunwell might allow her void nature to corrupt its magic. Being in the presence of that ancient magical font had soothed her soul at first, like standing in full sun after an eternity of dark and stormy nights. She had felt the power flow into her, filling her with light, and then it were as if she had herself become a portal, and the creatures of the void spilled out like pus from a wound. And then she had risked her life to fight the catastrophe which she had unleashed. But it was not enough to end what she had inadvertently started. As much as she hated to admit it in many ways, she was a threat to everything she loved, which explained why she had been keeping her own loved ones at a distance, as she has explained to Khadgar during her visit. Still, she had ties here, old and new, and the Regent Lord had at least honored that history. She ignored the whispers from the void and from her own conscience, and refocused on her goal, even as Lothamar's guards fanned out around her, keeping their distance. She would be unable to walk freely, but that changed nothing. They were there to stop her from harming the city, but that had never been her intention. The streets of Silvermoon were being recobbled, but they still felt the same under her silver-chased boots, were still imbued with the same beauty and magic. The trees lining the path had pale bark and branches with eternally oranged leaves, and the large white columns were right where she remembered them to be, rising tall on either side of her. Ilaria knew her way here as she walked. Memories floated up, layers upon layers like watercolor paint built up in many washes. As she walked, the residents of Silvermoon came into sharper focus, and their ease was palatable. Spotting her, people retreated through open doors and disappeared down alleys. Faces with perked ears appeared in windows before drapes were quickly drawn. Indeed, Lorthamar was right. The people did not trust her. They actively seemed to fear her. Word must have spread about the Sunwell. Spread, and perhaps grown in the spread of like some foul, destructive fungus. Or perhaps it was the heavy white and silver arm on her left arm and the enormous bow that never left her side. She was a warrior through and through, and commoners often reacted to her like rabbits stilling in the shadow of the hawk. How easily they turn on you, like your true love has turned on you. You repulse Turalian. Your son fears you too. Unleash what repels them. Destroy them. Destroy all the unworthy insects here. Seize your power. Illyria's steps hastened. Perhaps it looked the same, but this place no longer felt like any sort of home. In truth, she was not sure what home ever meant anymore. She strolled past scaffolding where carpenters and masons worked on rebuilding various structures, and towards a row of houses, a place she had only ever heard of from Eretor. Even though he was a man grown, she still saw him the wailing bundles she handed off to her sister Verisa when she journeyed beyond the dark portal, before fate had turned her life upside down. Since her return from the twisting nether, she had kept her distance, fearful her connection to the void might harm her son, and so her relationship with him had withered. But with every heartbeat pounding in her chest, she would see their bond mended, as much as it could be, and impart her warning that he needed to stay safe here in the broken but cherished city she had walked as a child. She would fight as she always had, for the safety of her son and for the world they shared, and she would carry forward her hope for a time when this world would know peace. Finally, she stood before the blood-red door. The golden door knocker was shaped like a phoenix, its worn metal suggesting that at some point visitors had been welcome here. Through the open window, she heard a voice that made her heart race and her heart light up. What was her love doing here? She paused a moment, like a good ranger, to see what awaited her on the battlefield. Did I ever tell you about how your mother and I introduced the Elec to the Army of the Light? Trellian said. We worked with them on Draenor, and we suspected their tenacity, hardiness, and intelligence would make them boons as mounts. I seem to recall that you mentioned it. Hearing that voice and the subtle but fond annoyance in it, Illyria's heart melted. Her son, Erator, once an infant in her arms, barely visible through her tears as she said goodbye, knowing that leaving was the only way to keep him safe. Then a toddler with a sword who thought war was a grand thing. Then a boy sitting upon the shoulders of a knight of the silver hand, looking up at a statue of the mother he barely knew in the Valley of Heroes, feeling the warmth of her love beamed across the universe in the light and reaching for her graven face. Now he himself was a knight of the silver hand. He had tasted war. He was a man, and he barely knew her, and she him. You will never know him. He will see you as a monster, a traitor, an enemy. We've had so many grand adventures, Trellian continued with a rasping chuckle. Where do you think she is now? She heard Erator ask. The question filled her with unease. Perhaps it wasn't reasonable to stand outside the open window as they spoke of Elec, but Illyria would not eavesdrop as they spoke of her. Not only because she might betray herself with a gasp or a sigh and be caught, but also because she might hear something she desperately did not want to hear. You know I love her dearly, but your mother can't be contained. She froze again, and a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. I know you miss her. Of course I do, but... And just as quickly her smile faded. She and Turallion had been taking time apart lately, leaning into their respective work. She on her missions, Turallion off to attend council meetings. She thinks she's a danger to us, Erator said sadly. And you think so too. See, they do fear you. They should fear you. Kill them. Lyria's hand reached for the door. She knew it was wrong to keep eavesdropping, but while she could not picture a life without Turallion, she knew he found her void nature strange, though he had never admitted it, and likely never would. Now she wished to hear him say it plainly. She herself found it strange, but it lay between them, an uncrossable gulf that they neither could cross, for all that she would have welcomed the opportunity to be honest about the chaos that lived within her. Thinking won't bring her home, Turallion said. Now, did I ever tell you how an Elec that feeds exclusively on orchids produces Taladorian cheese? You keep dodging the topic, but I would like to know the truth. Weighty pause. Well, I suppose you have more important matters to which to concern yourself than cheese. I am not a child, Father. You cannot distract me. Please, I beg you. Tell me of my mother. You seldom speak of her. Another sigh. You detest Turallion. He is weak. End him. He will only cause pain. He will never understand. Your true power lies beyond him. Your mother is the love of my life, and she is a complicated creature. Illyria could take no more. She grasped the sun-warmed brass of the door knocker and looked to the sky as she knocked 3 times. The sun was golden now, but it was swiftly arcing toward the horizon. Soon the sky would fade to periwinkle and pink, and the stars would begin to wink out. She did not have the time she needed, so she had to make the time she had count. Were you expecting someone, son? She heard Trellian ask. One of the Breeze Blossom twins dropping off a jar of starflower honey, perhaps? Father, please. I am expecting no one, and no one should be expecting me. My thoughts are with my fellow knights, not with some paltry dalliance. Their sound sounded like his robes were suddenly too tight and strangling him. When Eritor opened the door, his cheeks were pink. He was clearly doing his best to look serious. Seeing her, and he failed. His jaw dropped and hope glowed in his golden eyes. As a baby, they'd been green like hers, but sometime in their long, long time apart, they had shifted color. Valeria did not mind this change. To her, he had always shone like the sun. "Mother," he said with a surprised smile. "My son." She wanted to hug him, but he was enormous and fully armored in shades of gold, same as he looked when last she'd seen him only a few months prior. Instead, she reached out a hand to cup his cheek. "I cannot believe I'm saying this, but my boy, you need a good shave." Eritor laughed and stepped back so she could enter the chamber. The moment the door was shut behind her, the whispers were but a distant hum. She turned toward Turallion like a magnet finding true north. He had not changed in the past months. In all their years together, centuries spanning realms and worlds and dimensions, he had always been beautiful to her. His new scars only served to highlight his strength and tenacity, and she could feel the pull of him, although she fought it. "My love," he said warmly, if a bit wearily. Valeria could deny it no longer. Perhaps things were strange between them, but each time they parted, they knew not if they would see each other again. She moved to embrace him, but stopped. The short distance between them seemed to span for great lengths. "I have missed you," she said, her voice low. "And I you." Their son watched, expecting them to hug or at least touch, but neither did. Valeria could see the hurt in Turallion's eyes, could feel the same longing to sink into each other and take the comfort that had long fed them both. "I was in town to consult with Leandrin on a matter and wish to keep a low profile," Turallion continued with a smile. "Will you be staying for a while, or is your sojourn as brief as mine?" She gazed into his eyes. She wanted him to see that she was not pleased to be leaving so soon. "You know me well. I am soon to depart on a mission for Khadgar. I would stay here with you both longer, but Lorthamar made it clear that my presence in Silvermoon is not welcome. I shall leave by nightfall, or threaten any goodwill he still has for the bond we once shared." Talia nodded. "Shall I join you on this journey?" Of course she considered it, but the more she learned about the void, and the more she used her void powers, the more uncomfortable the paladin grew in her presence. Like he had said, she was a complicated creature. "He will never accept your true nature." Ilaria knew that if Turallion could hear the voices that clawed at her psyche, he would either push her away forever or spend the rest of his life trying to fix her. Possibilities that were equally repugnant. She loved him for exactly who he was, and sometimes wondered if he loved her merely out of habit and stubbornness. She was changing and evolving into something new, but Turallion was hardening into who he was and always has been. He didn't need to know that. "This is a quest I must undertake alone, but my son may join me on a brief walk before I depart," she said at last. "An excellent idea," Turallion all but shone with hope. "I'm certain you two have much to discuss." "I should like to see Silvermoon during the golden hour, if you'll squire me. I have heard the architects are doing a beautiful job with the new construction." Eritor held out his arm, but Ilaria did not take it. Not yet. "Perhaps it would be best to shed our armor and walk around the crowd disguised as regular citizens," she said, eyeing his gargantuan pauldrons. Those I passed on my way here did not look too fondly on my weaponry, nor did Lorthamar's guards." It vaguely annoyed her when her son looked to Turallion for his opinion. "Go on and pretend," he said with a chuckle. "Pretend for an afternoon that you're normal. War will not break out in the next hour." "As you wish." Eritor began to unstrap his heavy pauldrons, and Ilaria stuffed her own armor and weapons into an enchanted bag. Thus unburdened, she felt light and quick and confident that she still had the resources and skills to handle any threat that might come. How strange, she thought, that a mother going for an afternoon stroll with her son should wish to be armed to the teeth. Stranger still that she herself was considered the biggest threat here. Many thought all windrunners were born to fight, but that was not true. Illyria's father and brother had rarely half the sword and bow. Some in Silvermoon still lives such a life, believing their walls were enough to keep the city safe. They were wrong, of course, but that did not mean Illyria could not dream of a return to such a time when she might see her son dance in the glen or put his lips to a merry fife. Azeroth and her children deserved to know peace, and Illyria has spent the better part of her 1,000 years vainly chasing it. As Erator continued to remove his armor, Trallian stepped closer to her, smiling again. "How were your travels?" he asked. "Fair," she replied. "Matters in Stormwind? The same. What of Silvermoon? Is Greaves still making sugar spindles here? Is Branson still a stuffy gossip noble? Truth be told, we are kept too busy for such amusements, but I hope you will see them while we're out on your walk." At that she smiled at him in turn, but with a hint of sadness. His smile was sad too. He gestured to Arator. "Hurry up, son. Enjoy the sunshine. I know my arguments will not convince your mother to settle down for a while back in Stormwind. Perhaps you can sway her. It would be pleasant to spend what time we can as a family." But Ilaria could sense the lie wrapped in this truth. It was a charming idea, to be sure, but the reality would invoke three people who did not know or understand each other, reaching awkwardly for conversation and waiting for the next war. Trallian might have hoped the young paladin had the power to bring his mother home, but as it turned out, Ilaria was the one who would be doing the convincing. Once Erator had finished removing all his armor, Ilaria looked at her son in his simple black robes and felt a rush of pride for her offspring. She married her He married her lithe quickness with Trallian's sturdy strength, but improved by regal posture and a kind smile. This time, when he offered his arm, she took it, and he escorted her out of the house. She looked back at Trallian briefly, and he waved and mouthed, "I loved you." "Yes, love," she mouthed back. To her great sorrow, she realized that she had gotten better at leaving him than reuniting with him. For a long moment their eyes locked, and what passed between them was not a sentence or a sonnet, not even a tome, but an entire library of feelings unspoken. So much she wanted to say but didn't know how. So much that could never be said. Her eyes begged for her to come home, but he would not ask that sacrifice of her. His yearning tugged at her soul, but at last she had to look away. Another time. Another time they would speak from the heart. Another time, perhaps, she would stay. She hated this just as much as he did. But if they did not part ways and fight their own battles, this world would end, existence would end, and there would be nowhere left to reunite. Thus duty would always take their precedence over love, and his understanding of that was one of the reasons she loved him in the first place. When Ilaria returned her focus to Erator, she saw something similar in his face. Love, loss, yearning. She had seen the look pass between his parents, witnessed an intimate, intricate moment, and now he had to look away. "You've chosen a lovely day," he said after clearing his throat. Outside, the golden hour reigned supreme. Warm sunbeams, the color of melted butter, arced down through the gently rustling leaves, themselves the blaze of copper and crimson striking all the touches of gold with a triumphant glow. Lavender shadows shifted on the cobblestones and cropped up the sides of the newly painted white buildings. Even if she were angry with Lorthamar, Ilaria could still see the beauty and style in the place, and she still felt somewhat at home, even if that sense of belonging came with a ticking clock. "We're being followed," Erator remarked under his breath. She flicked a glance at the watchful guards. "A condition of my visit. Worry not." I shall pretend we are alone then, despite our entourage. Looking up into the sun, Erator rolled up his sleeves, and Ilaria was surprised to see tattoos covering his forearms. When did you get those? She said, daring to touch the dark dragon twining up his wrist. On his other arm, the dragon's sunny twin curled in perfect symmetry, one dark, one light. Erator looked down sheepishly and attempted to pull his sleeves back into place. Oh, I mean, your father might mind them, but I do not. They are beautiful. Relaxing, he rolled up both sleeves and held out his arms so she could admire the work. Someone amazing gave them to me. Lopsided grin. Yes, I recognize the style. She returned his grin. She liked this small act of revolt. Proof that even if she had not raised him, he had at least inherited some aspects of her personality. A little rebellion is good for the soul, she added. And for a moment it felt as if they had some common ground, a place where they might begin to build something better. Perhaps to Arator it was just the shared smile and some ink, but Ilaria knew she would hold that moment in her memories forever. The moment, however, did not last. One of the guards behind them coughed, and it suddenly felt as if they were on a stage, play acting the roles of mother and son. What have you come to discuss? Erator asked, his tone reverting to polite, as if she were a stranger instead of his mother. Well, why not? She was both. I would like to know how my son fares. She looks upon him tenderly, her heart clenching as a thought of him striding headlong into war they might not win. She gestured ahead. As we talk, perhaps we could walk the full circle of the city and then wander the bazaar. He chuckled and led her onward. Sometimes I forget that you know the place. I know it well indeed, as it once was. I was briefly ranger captain of Kelthalos, if you did not know. Because how would she know what he might have learned of her past? Father has told me some things about your history. Eratora was choosing his words so carefully, so formally. Most of all, he speaks of your strength as a leader and your proficiency as a fighter. Those are indeed some of the things he values most. Erator paused. He was still watching his words. It was difficult for Ilaria to stroll so slowly. She was more accustomed to striding everywhere, if not running directly towards danger. They were in the Walk of Elders now, a busy and well-kept section of the city with a few travelers still finding their way and ogling at the glorious architecture. Golden trees swayed overhead, and potted plants floated in small groupings that brought a breezy, carefree feeling to the paths. The scent of roasting meat and fresh bread wafted out of the Wayfarer's Rest Inn, and Ilaria remembered the delightful mutton stew she had enjoyed there long ago, with Turallion. Things had been easier. Do you and your father not get along? She asked gently. My own relationship with my mother was strained. She wanted me to be something I was not, and I was hot-headed when I was younger. At least we managed to reconcile before. Now Laria trailed off. Growing up with Verisa, surely Erator knew the stories, knew what had become of most of the Windrunner family. She did not need to dig up old graves, not when they had so little time together. The war, he finished for her, the words spoken darkly. He shook his head. No, it is nothing like that, nothing so serious. Father has much to teach me, and his experience with the light and on the battlefield is invaluable, but how to put it into words? Sometimes I would like to go fishing with Turallion the man instead of sharpening my sword with Turallion the high exarch of the army of the light, as he scrutinizes my whetstone. When she did not immediately speak, he hurried to add, I think the world of him, I do. He's my hero. It's just you never knew him as the hero before you knew him as the father. And that cannot be reversed so easily. He nodded with relief. Exactly so. We have much in common, but I often feel like he sees me more of a project and less as a son. Up ahead, family purchased pastries from a vendor's cart. The mother carried an infant strapped to her chest, while the father held the hand of a toddler who chattered excitedly about his favorite flavor. When Ilaria looked at her son, it was hard to imagine that he had ever been so small and innocent. She had only ever seen him in those years thanks to the light and from far, far away. She had never held his sticky hand, didn't know what his favorite flavor of tart might be. It was so hard, she said roughly, one hand around the emerald necklace. So hard, putting you in Verisa's arms, knowing all the tender moments I would miss, knowing that if I did not leave, one would get the chance to experience those moments because the entire world would be in a charred husk. You were so tiny. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. I know that in what state you're seeking absolution, Aristotle said, his voice low. Aunt Verisa did well enough in raising me, but she was a poor substitute for what I needed. He looked at her, curiosity in his eyes. Though I do not deny when I was alone and sad and sought your comfort, I found you in the light. It is what brought me to this calling, dedicating myself to a cause. Eritor stopped in front of a crumbling house and turned to her. This place had long ago fallen to the scourge and was just now being rebuilt. A fresh stack of stone waited behind a half-constructed wall, and someone was nurturing two freshly planted seedlings on each side of a gaping hole that would one day again hold a red-painted door. A family had lived here once. They had been driven out, or worse. But now the people of Silvermoon had come together to rebuild it, and soon new memories would be made here. Broken things can be fixed, Ilaria thought as she watched her son's tall, broad-shouldered shadow stretch longer against the wall. If there was hope, there could be healing. I prayed you felt it, she admitted. There were moments when I could see your face through the light, and my heart ached that I could not hold you as a mother should. There were times it was as if I felt you crying out for me, and I reached out in turn and hoped that you know that you were loved. It's as if there has always been a string from my heart extending to yours no matter how far away. Everything is connected, like the light with the dark, in perfect balance. She regarded the two serpentine dragons flowing up each of his arms. Aunt Farisa told me something similar once. She said to never doubt your love and to trust that you would never leave me by choice, but that you were a great hero and that the entire world depended on you. And I never understood until one day. His hand became a fist. You, me, Father, we have a duty, a mission that others don't possess. The first time I was called to war, it was as if I finally began to understand you. A shadow passed overhead, and Ilaria looked up to see a golden dragon hawk streaking across the sky, likely headed to Sunstrider Idol, with a traveler on its back. Its shrill screech echoed, and Eritor looked up too, shielding his eyes with his hand, and smiled. I am happy to be understood, Ilaria said with an ache in her throat. Even as I know what your father and I did cannot be truly forgiven. You are a monster. This boy can never understand you, cannot see you for what you are. Just give in. The void knows you. The void welcomes you. Give in. Become what you truly are. But I am grateful for your grace. I hope that one day Azeroth will be safe, and we can spend so much time together that you grow sick of my company. A rueful chuckle. Perhaps one day it will be so. Perhaps in another world things will be different. But this is the only world we have, and we are both dedicated to fighting for it no matter the cost. They left the new construction and passed into the Royal Exchange, where golden-laid benches were placed at thoughtful intervals, and people were queued up outside the auction house and at the bank just before closing time, tapping their feet and muttering about the wait. Ilaria's pulse quickened. The sun was going down, and she did not have much time left. They were silent as they entered Farstrider's square. Here, archers were lined up in neat rows, hitting their targets with absolute precision, while nearby a mounted cavalry practiced maneuvers on their hawk striders, their violet feathers flashing in the dying sun. What is it you do when you are not fighting? Ilaria asked. Erta scratched his scruffy chin. Like these warriors, I spar with my comrades. I dedicated myself to study of the light. And do you have... So awkward to broach the subject. Special someone? He looked away, blushing. Mother, please, I am a servant, a warrior. What kind of life can I offer another when I am dedicated elsewhere? There is always room for love, my son. She trailed off, feeling beyond hypocritical. Thankfully, he did not call her on it. I have all that I need. I have a life here. He did, and she knew nothing of it. You know nothing of him. Why would he listen to you? Love you? You are nothing to him. Or at least, Avatar said, I have a duty here. He will fight and fail. Turn him to our cause. They were in the court of the sun now, standing before a grand fountain bedecked with giant fish and graceful sindori, the clear blue water providing a peaceful and musical counterpoint to the tall dignity of the Sun Fury spire looming above all. Lorthamar was in that grand palace somewhere, possibly looking down from one of its many cupolas or balconies, waiting for Ilaria to overstay her welcome and meet the wrath of his soldiers. The moment to delay was over. Listen, my son. Something is coming, she said, her voice low as they rounded a bend where the walls were closer and the shadows darker. There was no one nearby just then, but ears were everywhere, and the guards would not be far behind them. Khadgar told me there are signs, she continued in a hushed voice. Portents. The artifact I am chasing heralds some new danger, an enemy lurking in the shadows. A battle is coming, and I must beg you, as your mother, and as a former ranger captain of this very kingdom, stay out of the fight. Ertor stopped mid-stride, his brows drawing down. You can't be serious. He doubts you. He hates you. I have never been one for humor. All I have ever wanted for you was a life of peace, away from the battlefield. That is why I left you with Verissa. That is why I told you so long ago that war was not glory. Defending Azeroth is my calling, and need not be yours. The warmth in her son's eyes winked out. He looked every one of his years then, a man grown and hardened in battle. Listen, mother, you may not know me as well as you would like, but you must know I would never abandon my duty. I would never shirk my responsibility and leave the risk to my fellow knights. Can you imagine a father sitting home during a war? What would he do? Knit socks and sing songs and pretend the world was good and safe while others died in the streets because he was not there to defend them? He shook his head and turned away from her, pulling down his sleeves to cover his tattoos again. Do you think me unworthy? Ilaria stepped around and faced him. It is because I know you are worthy that I urge you not to fight. Live to rebuild this world from what it may come of it. Do not fall as I have watched so many fall. There is nothing I fear in all of Azeroth, in any world, in any universe, except losing you. He would not meet her eyes. He was gazing past her, beyond her, searching himself. Perhaps I am not yours to lose. When you gave me to Verissa, you gave up the ownership one soul feels over another. Like you, I belong to the cause, even if it hurts you to hear that. It will hurt you again and again. There's no pain in the void. Abandon your flesh. Become more than this. The hurt is worthwhile, she whispered. It is a gift to see you alive and grown, and taking your place in a world being rebuilt from rubble. I cannot agree with your decision. It is not what I had hoped for you, not what I would choose, but I am proud of you, my son. His eyes briefly closed, and a small smile touched his lips. It is strange that sometimes I feel closer to you when you are far away, but right now, I felt it again. Just like that day in the Valley of Heroes. His golden eyes opened once more, and he ran a hand through his long, sun-burnished hair before he continued onward. They rounded a corner and stood in the courtyard before the bazaar, where vendors were beginning to close shop for the evening as families hurried past on their way home with full baskets and bags. Nearby, between two archways, stood a statue of Kelthus Sunstrider. With perfect timing, the guards emerged, reminding Ilaria that those who threatened the Sunwell could not feel welcome here for long. Erator ignored them. He pointed to the sky. And look, there is Turalian's hammer, as if he's calling us home to supper. Ilaria gazed at the constellation, the faint stars just beginning to twinkle in a sky gone indigo. If she did not leave Silvermoon soon, things were going to get uncomfortable. She would prefer not to face Lorthamar again, especially not in front of her son. They had almost reached an understanding, and she did not wish to be scolded and escorted out like some common criminal in front of him. He is calling you, perhaps, as my mission calls me. Will you walk me to the gates? Erator held out his arm again, and after hesitating a moment, she took it. The irony amused her. She had been absent during the years he would have needed to hold her hand to learn to walk, and now it was he who led her. Her baby, now this man. Are you sure I can't convince you to stay home? To marry one of the Breeze Blossom twins and raise a future baker or tavern keeper? Someone to carry on the Windrunner name? Erator sighed. Just when we found common ground. Our common ground is fighting. The difference is that I don't have a choice, and you do. He withdrew his arm with a glare. I do not, and I am sorry you cannot see that. And that is our common ground, stubbornness. Neither of us has the option to reject our calling, no matter what the cost. They walked side by side, and Alara could feel her son's disquiet. She had felt the same weight from Turalian time and again, and after an argument about her communion with the void. If there was a vast chasm between them, if only she could reach them, her men, if only they could accept her for who she truly was. And, well, that was all that Erator wanted from her, was it not? You have the strength to protect the world, so you must fight as I did. But I know that I will never want this for you, she said. A mother will always want to protect her young. Your love I have never doubted, he responded sadly. But I wish I knew you better, and I wish you would stay long enough for all of us to grow bored and quarrelsome with each other. I cannot know myself unless I know you. Knowing oneself is the work of a lifetime, she admitted, and I have been working at it for several. Change is a part of life, but loving you is my only constant. Her pace slowed as they neared the gates. The guards, waiting there, watched her closely, weapons in hand, as the guards behind them fanned out, forming a wall. Knight Erator, one of the guards said, inclining his head. Erator returned the gesture as they passed through the gates. Once outside the city, Ilaria felt a wave of relief. She had lived up to her half of the bargain, and now she was again beyond the judgment of anyone within the city walls. She swiftly withdrew her armor from her enchanted bag and was soon sighing in relief to again bearing its weight. Her armor, like the whispers of the void, had become an intrinsic part of her, and she felt more herself with it than without. Erator, too, could sense the change. Light bless you, mother, he said formally, with none of his earlier warmth. May your vision prove fruitful, and I would prefer its urgency be proven unfounded, but I carry your hopes with me, my son. She regarded him for a long moment, and he stepped forward. They embraced stiffly, and Ilaria remembered what it had felt like. to carry a child within her and dream of meeting the new soul she felt stirring for months. She wished she could keep him as safe as that, shield him with her body from all the horrors of the world, but he was taller than she was now, a man of his own making, and he had made his choice. All that was left for her was to support it. She wished she could have held him forever. Goodbye, Erator. He stood back. May the light guide you in your quest, Mother. She knew he was annoyed with her, but she could tell that he was still sorry to see her go. Erator turned and passed back through the gate, and Ilaria watched him with a fond smile. He walked like a warrior, shoulders back, a loose-limbed, athletic elegance to his gait. He is leaving you. He detests you, hates what you are. He's glad to be rid of you. Ilaria sighed. This visit could have gone better, but it could have gone worse. She had doubted he would heed her words, but she had to say her piece. At least now he knew her feelings. Feelings she had held inside for years and years, hoping that one day they could speak honestly. They were cut from the same cloth, just as she had to find a dark heart, even if it meant leaving her family again. So he had run into the battle that would follow, even if it meant disappointing his mother. He will die on the battlefield. He will fall. You have failed him. This was not the first time Ilaria had walked away from her family, and she doubted it would be the last. She could only hope that the next time she stepped through Erator's door, it would be with tidings of victory and an end to whatever evil threatened Azeroth. Perhaps then Lorthamar would welcome her as a hero, and Turalyon would speak his mind, and Erator would settle down with someone nice, and Ilaria could sit with her family and have a simple meal with no talk of impending doom. It will never happen. You are changed. You are different. They will never understand you. They do not want to understand you. You do not need to. They do not want you. You must know, she barked. That is enough for lies. For one day, I will have this moment. For once, thankfully, the whispers quieted altogether. She knew it would not last, but perhaps the void understood that on this topic she could not be swayed. She loved her family, and she wanted what was best for them, and for now that was enough. Perhaps her son did not know her well, but he wanted to, and that was something precious. The city glowed behind her, lit with bright crystals and merry fires, but Ilaria Windrunner walked away in the darkness again, always, and she walked alone. But this time it was not violence that drove her forward. It was hope. So that's a half of this book, The Voices Within, that is going to lead into War Within. Basically, give a description of what people have been going through and what they've been working on, I guess. I thought they were going to release 4 stories. I only see 3. And it looks like the next stories that we'll probably only see once the book comes out is Thrall's, Moira's, and Lotar's. So not bad. Good stories. Everybody, I don't know if it's the way I read things or if it's just how writing is nowadays. I've been tripping a lot, but I've had I personally haven't had much time to actually just sit down and read. So I might be a little rusty there. But I hope you enjoyed this. It was nice to do some voice acting for once. I kind of like doing that. I don't get much of a chance to do such. If you like this, I will definitely consider doing more of them and different stories if you'd like. Um, leave me some kind of note. You can private message me here on Twitch, or you can leave me some kind of message in Discord. Um, so I know if there's any interest in me doing this a bit more and just having like a nice, simple, quiet day where we're not really doing much. We're just going to be kind of chilling out here for a bit. You know what I mean? All right. Yeah, that's it for me here. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this stream. If you did, please consider a follow and hit that notification button. That way you know when I'm on. But we usually have a steady stream Thursday through Sunday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard, 6 p.m. Pacific. Usually running some kind of a game, but today I thought I'd do something a little different by reading the short stories that were previews that came up. Um, sometimes Twitch doesn't notify you when I'm actually on, and if there should be something that comes up with this, some boy, I can't even think anymore today. I was tired. Um, Sometimes Twitch doesn't notify you when I'm actually on. That's why following me on Discord is actually helpful. There's a link below, also exclamation point Discord, so that you can find out the latest and greatest. Leave me messages, any ideas, just talk about anything. It's open to the those who come in. Um, we have a Facebook page, but I'm not as active on that as I am with other stuffs like Discord, so it's best to contact me there. Um, we have a YouTube page, which I'm slowly adding stuff onto it. Um, Link down below, exclamation point YouTube, and there's a link. More people who sign up with it, the better we do in the algorithm, especially here. The algorithm likes to bury people, especially those young starting entrepreneurs like myself, even though I've been here for about 3 years. So, more eyes on me while I'm alive helps out greatly. Um, Trying to make 2 affiliate. More eyes here helps us out in the long run. That's about it. I'm signing out for the this was our last day for the streams until Thursday. I hope you have a good week. Um, I know summer's in the thick of it right now. Today was absolutely stifling for me going outside. Hopefully it's not bad for you. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in for these 4 days. Take care. Have a good week, and we'll see you on Thursday. Good night.